I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. Madam Secretary, will you please introduce this morning's agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 7 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of inquiry on accelerating wireline infrastructure build-out. Excuse me. Second, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking on freeing wireless infrastructure from unlawful regulatory burdens. Third, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking on phone jamming solutions in non-federal correctional facilities. Fourth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking on modernizing broadcast ownership rules. Fifth, you will consider a direct final rule deleting nearly 400 primarily wireline-related rules and requirements that govern obsolete technology, are duplicative, and are no longer used in practice. Sixth, you will consider a declaratory ruling that would make Wi-Fi on school buses ineligible for E-rate program funding. Seventh, you will consider an order on reconsideration that grants a petition for reconsideration and makes off-premises use of Wi-Fi hotspots and internet services ineligible for E-rate program support. This is your agenda for today. Today's first item is titled Accelerating Wireline Infrastructure Build-Out and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Joseph Calashone, Bureau Chief, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Chief Calashone, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration this morning a notice of inquiry that, if adopted, would launch an inquiry into state and local statutes, regulations, and legal requirements that could prohibit the provision of wireline telecommunication services in violation of Section 253 of the Communications Act. I'd like to thank the entire Bureau team for their hard work on this item, as well as our colleagues in the wireless, media, Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus, as well as the Offices of Economics and Analytics and General Counsel for their helpful input. Joining me at the table are A.J. Burton, Associate Bureau Chief, Jody May, Chief of the Competition Policy Division, Liz Dragula, Special Counsel, and Jesse Goodwin, Attorney Advisor. Jesse will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. To build out networks to consumers, providers must obtain authorizations from state and local governments to deploy facilities in public rights-of-way and use them to provide service. This can result in significant delays and increased costs that impede deployments, disincentivize private investment in modern networks, and waste taxpayer-funded federal support. While reforms that the Commission adopted in 2018 have spurred significant deployments, the Commission continues to be advised that wireline deployment projects are getting stuck in red tape created by state and local requirements. If adopted, this notice would commence an inquiry into further actions that the Commission could take to limit processing times and fees for the state and local authorizations needed to complete wireline deployments, as it has done for small wireless facilities. The notice of inquiry would seek targeted comment on the delays that providers encounter when accessing state and local public rights-of-way for wireline telecommunications services, the fees charged by state and local governments when providers seek authorizations to deploy and provide wireline telecommunications services, the in-kind compensation requirements imposed by state and local governments when, as a condition of obtaining authorizations for access to public rights-of-way, and whether the fees, delays, and conditions imposed by state and local governments have the effect of prohibiting the provision of wireline telecommunication services in violation of Section 253 of the Communications Act. Finally, the notice of inquiry would invite broad comment on specific state and local statutes, regulations, and legal requirements that the Commission could consider preempting via a sua sponte preemption proceeding under Section 253D. The Bureau recommends adoption of this notice of inquiry and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. I agree with the chairman and others who want the FCC to be doing everything it can to accelerate broadband build-outs, especially of wireline infrastructure that can deliver reliable, high-capacity connections necessary to meet this country's stated goal of winning the AI race. While I welcome public input on how we can spur further investment, we must remember that our primary responsibility is ensuring that these networks serve the public. That means adopting policies that encourage deployment while also holding providers accountable for delivering affordable, reliable, and resilient service to all communities, rural, urban, tribal, and tribal alike. But we also must recognize that the challenges people are facing right now are severe. The lapse of the Affordable Connectivity Program has already created real uncertainty for millions of families who now face higher bills or risk losing service altogether. And in recent months, unnecessary political, ideological, and technical hurdles have slowed the BEAD program, leaving too many communities waiting. That uncertainty is forcing businesses in many states to rethink investments. This administration should stop treating BEAD as a moving target and let the states be the best stewards of their communities' needs. Looking ahead, I also want to caution against getting sidetracked by attempts to fulfill a failed congressional effort and second-guess states that are placing guardrails on artificial intelligence. States can be important test labs for what may or may not work with emerging technologies like this one. Not to mention, our authority in this area is dubious at best, particularly after recent court decisions limiting our authority. We will be better served by focusing on the areas where we stand on firm legal ground. So I welcome this effort, and I look forward to working together to get it right.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gomez. Commissioner Trustee now.
Thank you. State and local governments and the FCC work together as partners in many ways. We share the goal of bringing advanced networks capable of providing voice and data services to all Americans through programs like universal service. And, among other things, we share the goal of protecting consumers from harms like illegal robocalls. At times, however, state or local interests may take a different path, which delays our access to connectivity. In those situations, the Commission has a duty under the Communications Act to step in. Section 253 is one example. Section 253A generally bars state or local requirements that actually or effectively prohibit a provider from offering telecommunications service. In past decisions, the Commission has explained how this provision preempts state or local moratoria on network deployment or fees that inhibit the placement of small wireless facilities essential for expanded or improved services. Today's notice of inquiry builds on that foundation. As the item recognizes, delays in authorizations, even if not outright moratoria, can effectively prohibit wireline network deployment and the telecommunications services those networks enable. Likewise, wireline networks, like wireless networks, could be inhibited by excessive or burdensome fees. Costs can also take other forms, such as in-kind compensation requirements on which the NOI appropriately seeks comment. When these costs or delays materially inhibit carriers' ability to provide service, consumers are harmed, public safety is diminished, and U.S. leadership in advanced communications networks is weakened. That is why it is timely to examine these issues as part of the Build America agenda. I recognize that state and local practices vary, and I appreciate the NOI's efforts to build a detailed record on these legal requirements. I also welcome examples of state and local approaches that successfully balance Congress's objective to foster telecommunications services with the important interests of state and local governments. In the past, the Commission has drawn on such best practices to guide implementation of provisions like Section 253. Where the record warrants, however, the Commission should not hesitate to fulfill its responsibility to preempt state and local requirements that conflict with Section 253. I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for their excellent work on this item, and I look forward to working with the chairman as well as other Commission staff to advance the Build America agenda and with Congress as it considers additional ways to reduce permitting-related barriers to broadband deployment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Since its rollout in July, the FCC's Build America agenda has been helping to deliver wins all across the country for the American people. We've already advanced plans to accelerate the upgrade from old copper line networks to new modern ones, to speed access to utility poles, and to modernize the FCC's approach to environmental rules. Building on this momentum, I recently traveled to Malvern, Arkansas, and saw firsthand how the Build America agenda can help unleash even more high-speed infrastructure builds. That's where I got a chance to meet with Kalen and his construction crew. They were laying new fiber lines to connect a community that previously had been stuck on only old copper line service. Thanks in large part to the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, this project currently serves 2,000 homes, expanding opportunity for many hardworking Americans. Now, the Malvern, Arkansas success story is one that we want to see replicated all across the country. However, before crews like Kalen's can even get shovels turning dirt, providers must obtain authorizations from state and local authorities. Too often, this requires obtaining permits and approvals from multiple different jurisdictions with different timelines, with different personnel, with different requirements, all of which can increase costs, slow deployment, and discourage the private investment we need to end the digital divide. That's why, as part of the Commission's Build America agenda, we're launching an inquiry to explore permitting reform for wireline infrastructure builds. Section 253 of the Communications Act expressly prohibits state and local regulations that effectively prohibit infrastructure builds. As we move forward today, we do so mindful of the FCC's past actions and precedents under Section 253. For instance, in 2018, the Commission issued a decision that concluded that Section 253A prohibited state and local governments from effectively shutting down all new infrastructure builds through a moratoria on those construction projects. That same year, the Commission limited process times and fees for the build-out of small wireless facilities. Following these actions, we saw a significant surge in new wireline and wireless infrastructure builds. With today's item, the Commission will ask questions and explore ways that we can use that same type of authority to remove impediments to the deployment of new wireline infrastructure. So for all their great work on the item, I'd like to thank the FCC's talented staff that's worked on this, in particular Melina Barzilay, Jonathan Campbell, Adam Candu, Matt Collins, Liz Drugala, Garnet Hanley, Rick Mallon, Maria Malarkey, Brendan Murray, Scott Novak, Anjali Singh, Don Stockdale, and Jeff Waldow. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Gomez?
With my apologies to the Bureau for not thanking you for your good work. I approve.
Noted. Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes yes as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Now, Madam Secretary, would you please proceed to the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman.
Fire car the censorship czar! Fire car the censorship czar! Fire car the censorship czar! Fire car the censorship czar!
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is titled Freeing Wireless Infrastructure from Unlawful Regulatory Burdens and will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Joel Taubenblatt, Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you. Chief, when you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm pleased to have with me at the table from the Wireless Bureau, John Lockwood, who is Senior Policy and Legal Advisor in our front office, Garnet Hanley, Chief of the Competition and Infrastructure Policy Division, Allison Jones, Associate Chief of that division, and Jeff Bartlett, an Attorney Advisor in the division, and Jeff will present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Carr and Commissioners. The notice of proposed rulemaking before you seeks to advance the Commission's Build America agenda by seeking comment on reforms that would streamline deployment of towers and other wireless infrastructure. The notice considers new measures to implement Section 6409 of the Spectrum Act of 2012 and Sections 253 and 332 of the Telecommunications Act. Congress enacted these provisions to promote the rapid and efficient deployment of wireless infrastructure by limiting state and local barriers to entry, ensuring non-discriminatory access, and streamlining the approval process for modifications and siting of network build-out. In regards to Section 6409, the notice addresses a question that the Ninth Circuit remanded to the Commission about the meaning of concealment elements. Concealment elements are used by builders to minimize the visual impact of towers and other wireless infrastructure. It further proposes to define when a proposed modification would remove the benefits of a concealment element and provides examples to illustrate how the rule would operate in practice. Turning to Sections 253 and 332, the notice seeks comment on reforms the Commission might adopt to ensure that state and local permitting regulations don't place impermissible roadblocks on wireless infrastructure construction. For example, the notice asks whether the Commission should codify certain clarifications from the 2018 Small Cell Order and preempt specific state and local regulations that violate Sections 253 or 332 of the Commission's implementing rules. In particular, the notice seeks comment on state and local regulations surrounding the deployment of macro towers, fees, delays, and other barriers to wireless infrastructure construction. Finally, the notice seeks comment on whether the Commission should consider implementing alternative dispute resolution procedures or an accelerated docket or rocket docket to facilitate the resolution of permitting disputes. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting to my right, Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. Americans rely on wireless technology and infrastructure on a daily basis. The wireless connectivity that we have come to expect, whether to call a friend, email our doctor, make a dinner reservation, or keep an eye on the dog via a doggy cam, is possible thanks to physical infrastructure deployed around us. As with any infrastructure, excuse me, I'm being serious. As with any infrastructure, building it involves negotiations between service providers and local governments. The notice of proposed rulemaking before us makes it easier to deploy necessary infrastructure that extends wireless communications to the benefit of communities across the country. Successful deployment requires collaboration, so I look forward to hearing from all stakeholders, including industry and local governments, about the proposals in this notice. Additionally, thank you to the Office of the Chairman for incorporating my edits to this item, including seeking comment about our legal authority regarding artificial intelligence. My comments in the Wireline NPRM about our legal authority on AI also apply here. And as always, thank you to the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for your work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. As the Commission examines whether state and local requirements may actually or effectively prohibit providers from offering wireline telecommunications services, it is equally important to consider the impact of these requirements on wireless services. Americans are increasingly dependent on mobile devices and the networks that deliver high-speed internet access anytime and anywhere. This progress is due in no small part to substantial investments by wireless providers. A recent industry report highlights that over 15,000 new towers were activated in 2024, leading to expanded coverage and better quality mobile services. In my travels to Alaska and Mississippi, and in conversations with wireless carriers, both large and small, I consistently hear the same concern. Some of the biggest barriers to widespread deployment of mobile and fixed wireless networks are delays and restrictions caused by state and local requirements. Now, the Commission has made important strides to accelerate the deployment of 5G networks in 2018 and 2020 during President Trump's first term, yet our work continues. As I noted last month, the U.S. has made significant progress, but international comparisons show that we still lag behind global competitors like China, which has gained an advantage in part by aggressively streamlining its infrastructure siting policies. For this reason, it's both necessary and timely to revisit the Ninth Circuit decision in League of California Cities, v. FCC, and seek comment on the Commission's prior efforts to clarify the definition of concealment elements under the Spectrum Act's streamlined processing rules. In parallel with our work on wireline networks, this NPRM recognizes that excessive fees and delays in wireless authorizations can effectively prohibit deployment with potentially serious consequences. Consumers remain unconnected, public safety is diminished, and U.S. leadership in advanced communications is undermined. Building on our efforts to accelerate small cell deployment, the NPRM also examines whether state and local permitting regulations are inhibiting other critical infrastructure, such as macro towers and additional wireless facilities needed to bring the full benefits of 5G and beyond to suburban and rural communities. In this item, I appreciate the Chairman's inclusion of questions about the impact of state and local limits on densification. This inquiry will help inform how such limits may be slowing progress on 5G, 6G, artificial intelligence, and other future innovations. As I noted with respect to the wireline infrastructure NOI, I look forward to developing a robust record on the legal requirements of state and local permitting practices, as well as examples of effective approaches that successfully balance Congress's goal of fostering wireless telecommunication services with state and local interests. This understanding will guide our continued efforts to promote high-speed infrastructure builds in support of the Build America agenda and this new golden age of communications. I thank the Wireless Bureau for its work on this item, and I look forward to working with my colleagues and with Congress to unleash the full potential of wireless networks and strengthen America's leadership in next-generation wireless services. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Today's meeting is the permitting reform edition of our Build America agenda. We just voted to advance a proposal to streamline permitting for wireline builds, and now we're doing the same for wireless infrastructure. We have two great reasons for doing so. One, it works, and two, it's necessary. Back in 2017, then Chairman Pai asked me to lead the Commission's work to identify and remove barriers to the build-out of thousands of small cells, the building blocks for 5G. As part of this effort, we first set our sights on the FCC's own environmental and historic review processes, which accounted for an outsized share of deployment costs. So in March of 2018, we passed rules to exempt small cells from the types of reviews that had been required for the construction of large 200-foot towers. Later that year, we adopted a second package of infrastructure reforms to cap state and local permitting fees and speed up approvals through common sense shot clocks. Those reforms worked. Many states and local governments became key partners in the build-out of new 5G infrastructure. Just 2 years after we adopted our reforms, investment in wireless infrastructure surpassed the previous 7 years combined. And since 2018, the number of cell sites in service across the country has more than doubled. Thanks to all this investment and deployment, U.S. networks handled more wireless data traffic in 2023 than they did from 2010 to 2018 combined. But even with all this success, we have more to do. For one, some state and local governments still don't follow the federal rules. They sit on applications for too long, or they demand enormous sums of money simply to start processing permitting applications. For another, some authorities have stalled infrastructure builds using new tactics that we didn't have the chance to consider back in 2018. And for yet another, our 2018 reforms largely focused on small cells, but not other types of wireless deployments. All told, wireless providers still have to navigate a thicket of red tape just to get the permits they need, just so that Americans can get across the digital divide. And that's why we're dusting off our permitting reform playbook as part of the Build America agenda. We kickstarted those efforts in earnest last month when we opened a proceeding to modernize our environmental and historic reviews. And with today's item, we're taking a fresh look at our authorities under Sections 253 and 332 of the Communications Act to preempt state and local barriers to next-gen builds. We also look to finish our work to implement Section 6409 of the Spectrum Act, which Congress enacted to fast-track modifications to existing wireless infrastructure. We're pursuing these reforms because we want American companies to spend less time and capital dealing with red tape and more resources turning dirt in building out world-class networks. So for all their great work on this item, I want to thank in particular Jeff Bartlett, Rashawn Duvall, Jennifer Flynn, Eli Johnson, Robert Krinsky, and Jennifer Saulhaus from the Wireless Bureau, and from OGC, Anjali Singh and Scott Novak. With that, we will now turn to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty.
Approve.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda is titled Phone Jamming Solutions in Non-Federal Correctional Facilities and will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Once again, Joel Taubenblatt, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you. Chief Taubenblatt, when you and your team are ready, please proceed.
All right. Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. We have a new crew at the table. With me is Jessica Phineas, who's Assistant Bureau Chief of WTB, and Nellie Fusner, who's Legal Advisor in our front office, and Nellie will present the item.
Good morning, Chairman Carr and Commissioners. Contraband cell phones in prisons and jails have been a public safety problem for decades. Across the country, inmates have reportedly used these devices to orchestrate criminal activity, including murders, witness intimidation, illegal drug operations, assault, phone scams, and prison escapes. This third further notice proposes to give correctional officials more tools to fight that threat by authorizing jamming solutions in state and local correctional facilities. The proposal is designed to comply with Section 333 of the Communications Act. Under our proposal, carriers must lease spectrum to the prison to operate jammers in the prison facility. We would allow parties to negotiate the lease amongst themselves in the first instance. If negotiations fail, the prison can apply for an overlay license for jamming operations within a facility. The notice seeks comment on a range of technical protections to ensure that jamming solutions are limited to correctional facilities and do not interfere with licensed operations nearby. It also asks about potential special considerations for 911 calls and unlicensed Wi-Fi networks, proposes equipment authorization procedures, and seeks comment on whether additional safeguards are needed regarding the FCC marketing, importation, or labeling procedures. Beyond jammers, the notice asks about the viability of other technologies to combat contraband devices and on further streamlining procedures for current contraband interdiction system technologies. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
This notice of proposed rulemaking seeks to address a worthy and important policy goal, combating criminal activity aided by contraband phones in correctional facilities. I support our work furthering this goal, but the manner in which we propose to further this goal today gives me concern. The Communications Act of 1934 expressly prohibits any person from interfering with authorized communication signals. In alignment with this prohibition, and since our inception, the FCC has prohibited the interfering and blocking of communication signals, also known as jamming. Jamming prevents your phone from making a call, sending a text, or reaching the internet. For the last 90 years, the FCC has prohibited the practice of jamming by non-federal actors and even prohibited jamming equipment to be introduced into the American market. Selling, advertising, shipping, distributing, or importing jammers is currently prohibited, and we take enforcement action against parties that use jamming devices. That is because jamming devices can prevent you from completing 911 and other emergency calls, can interfere with communications networks used by fire, police, and other public safety entities, and can block general daily wireless communications. Today's NPRM proposes to allow correctional facilities to use jammers to block communications from contraband phones. While the problem we are trying to address is of critical importance, I worry about the potential unintended consequences of permitting jamming by non-federal actors and permitting jamming equipment to formally enter the American market. In addition to the inherent risk of blocking lawful and emergency communications, we have already seen bad actors use Wi-Fi jammers to disrupt security systems, security cameras, and cell phones to facilitate unauthorized entry and burglaries at homes and stores. Jamming poses such a risk that several states recently passed laws or are considering laws to curtail this activity. For example, Indiana passed a law explicitly banning radio jammers and increasing penalties for their use. California proposed criminalizing not only use, but also manufacture, import, and marketing of jammers. New York introduced a bill that would elevate possession of a jammer to a felony, and Florida has statutes that prohibit knowingly obstructing emergency and volunteer radio communications, a protection for first responders. Jamming equipment in the hands of bad actors can facilitate nefarious uses that pose far too great a risk to the public. Today's proposal demands that we proceed cautiously, aided by the knowledge of experience. That is why I propose to the chair that we first begin with a pilot program. A pilot program would allow us to test the real-world consequences of permitting jamming, even in this narrow scenario. Jamming, if not properly engineered, implemented, and maintained, has the potential to cause harmful interference to legitimate communications, including public safety and emergency services. A pilot program would allow us to learn about what happens to lawful communications around a correctional facility using jammers, especially when the facility is in a populated urban area. Could a lawful call to 911 be blocked simply because the caller was too close to a jammer operating in a jail? Would homes near correctional facilities experience disruptions in service? We must proceed carefully so as not to inadvertently block lawful communications. A pilot program would also give us invaluable insight to the challenges of authorizing jamming so that we get it right and keep the public safe. I'm grateful that the chair heard my concerns and included a new section in the NPRM asking for comments on the merits and setbacks of conducting a limited pilot program. Testing out how jamming would operate in the real world is critical to ensuring the safety of the public before we extend this practice across the United States. I'm also glad to see that we included questions about how the public can report interruptions in service when their lawful communications may have been affected by a jamming device. In that regard, I think our consumer complaints portal can offer recourse to consumers experiencing service interruptions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and the Office of Engineering and Technology for your outstanding work on such a complex proposal. I look forward to seeing the record develop.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the statement. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. In 2022, federal law enforcement officials uncovered, investigated, and dismantled a major drug trafficking organization that resulted in the seizure of 46 pounds of methamphetamine and heroin, more than 50 firearms, $35,000 in drug proceeds, and ultimately led to 21 convictions. This criminal enterprise had engaged in drug distribution, conspiracy, money laundering, and violent acts. The scale of this operation is truly staggering. Equally alarming is that it was orchestrated by an inmate serving a 30-year prison sentence in an Oklahoma Department of Corrections facility, using a contraband cell phone to direct those activities from behind bars with the help of other incarcerated associates. Unfortunately, cases like this are neither rare nor isolated. Contraband cell phones are routinely used inside jails and prisons to coordinate criminal activity, intimidate witnesses, and even plan escapes. These devices pose a grave threat to the safety of correctional staff, incarcerated individuals, and the public at large. The good news is that this problem has not gone unnoticed. Law enforcement officials, lawmakers, industry stakeholders, and others broadly agree on the urgent need to prevent contraband phones from entering correctional facilities and being used for unlawful purposes. The Commission has already taken important steps to combat this problem by facilitating and authorizing the use of contraband interdiction technologies. Those technologies include managed access systems and other detection tools designed to identify and block unauthorized cell phone use. Despite this progress, contraband cell phones remain a persistent public safety threat. And given this risk, I'm pleased that today's item seeks comment on additional tools to complement the resources already available to correctional facilities. In particular, the proposed clarification of Section 333 and the development of a regulatory framework would allow state and local corrections facilities working with wireless providers to deploy targeted jamming solutions in a precise and limited manner. I appreciate that the NPRM also seeks comment on ways to mitigate potential harmful interference to nearby consumers, public safety operations, or authorized communications. I want to thank the chairman for bringing forward this important item, and the dedicated staff of the Wireless Bureau. Thank you for your hard work on this complex issue. I also want to express my gratitude to law enforcement officials and the many states' attorneys general for their continued leadership in confronting the serious dangers posed by contraband cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. 9 years ago, I had the chance to meet a hero and a miracle. His name is Captain Robert Johnson. Captain Johnson served our country for 23 years in the Air Force. He then continued his public service by working for 15 years with the South Carolina Department of Corrections. In particular, he was in charge of finding and confiscating contraband cell phones at Lee Correctional Facility in Bishopville, South Carolina, a facility that I had a chance to visit the day we met. Captain Johnson was really good at his job. In fact, the inmates thought he was too good at it. 6 years before we met, Captain Johnson was getting dressed for work one morning in his home when his front door was kicked in and he was shot 6 times in the chest at point-blank range. It was a hit called in by an inmate using a contraband cell phone. Thankfully, Captain Johnson survived. But in many ways, his story is not unique. Contraband cell phones have been pouring into state and local prisons by the tens of thousands every year. They're used to run drug operations, orchestrate kidnappings, further criminal enterprises in communities all across the country. Over the years, the FCC has taken several steps to help address the public safety threats of contraband cell phones. We've authorized the use of contraband interdiction systems, taken numerous actions to streamline barriers to deploy those systems, and adopted a framework for carriers to disable contraband cell phones upon the request of a prison. Providing public safety officials with these tools has helped, but not nearly enough. That's the message I heard earlier this month when I joined Senator Tom Cotton and State AG Tim Griffin in Arkansas for a tour of the Varner Supermax facility. Federal prisons have long been authorized to jam contraband cell phones, but state and local prisons have not been allowed to use it. The guards and law enforcement officials we met with at Varner asked us to change this. They told us that contraband cell phones are at the root of so many evils that take place both inside and outside of prisons. If we can solve this problem, they said, if we can allow them to try jamming solutions, it will go a long way towards improving public safety. Senator Cotton and AG Griffin have been helping to lead the charge on this for quite a while. Senator Cotton introduced the Cell Phone Jamming Reform Act of 2025 in March, and has been introducing similar legislation over the last couple of years. AG Griffin has also led a letter with 22 other state AGs calling on the FCC to seek comment on targeted jamming technologies and to modernize our regulations to support law enforcement. Representative Kustoff in the House has also been a strong congressional leader on this initiative. Yesterday, he led a letter along with 10 other members of Congress supporting today's vote. Their calls have been echoed by many others. We respond to those calls today. With our vote, we propose to remove what many have viewed as a federal prohibition on jamming in state and local prisons. As we do so, we keep several points in mind. First, this will be entirely voluntary. No state or local prisons will be required to jam. Second, our notice proposes to authorize targeted jamming. Jamming technology can be precise enough that it doesn't interrupt the regular communications of law enforcement or community members in the vicinity. Third, this will not be a silver bullet. Jamming will not make sense for every facility, but there are many places where it will be the right solution. Now, after that Arkansas event I held earlier this month, on our drive back to the airport, I called Captain Johnson on the phone. We spoke for a little bit. He'd watched the live stream of the press conference. He said he was actually just a couple months removed from another surgery, but he said he could not be happier to see that the FCC was finally moving forward with a jamming proposal. He was so grateful to the agency for the work we're getting done. I told Captain Johnson how thankful we were for his years-long leadership on this issue. I'm glad that we're getting this one across the finish line for him. For their work on the item, I'd like to thank the FCC's talented team, in particular, Brian Butler, Jamie Coleman, Melissa Conway, Lloyd Coward, Michael Ha, Ira Kelts, Roger Noel, Nick Oros, and the whole group that's here today as well. Thank you so much for your work on the item, and we will proceed to a vote, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. Approved.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on our agenda today?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 on your agenda is titled Modernizing Broadcast Ownership Rules and will be presented by the Media Bureau, and Aaron Boone, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you. Chief Boone, when you are settled in, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Media Bureau presents a notice of proposed rulemaking that advances the 2022 quadrennial review of the Commission's broadcast ownership rules. The notice seeks comment on whether the Commission should retain, modify, or eliminate its media ownership rules, given the current state of the media marketplace. Joining me at the table are Lori Marbjerg, Ty Bream, and Chad Guo of the Media Bureau. Chad will present the item. Thank you, Chad.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Section 202H of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 requires the Commission to review its broadcast ownership rules every 4 years to determine whether they remain necessary in the public interest as a result of competition, and to repeal or modify any regulation the Commission determines to be no longer in the public interest. The 3 rules subject to this quadrennial review are the local radio ownership rule, the local television ownership rule, and the dual network rule. Today's NPRM seeks comment on whether these rules continue to promote the Commission's longstanding policy goal of fostering competition, localism, and viewpoint diversity, and therefore should be retained, or whether these rules no longer serve the public interest, and therefore should be modified or repealed. With regard to the local radio ownership rule, today's NPRM seeks comment on a number of issues, including the relevant product market for application of the rule, market size tiers, numerical station limits, and AM/FM subcaps. With regard to the local television ownership rule, the NPRM seeks comment on issues including the relevant product market for application of the rule and the numerical limit of owning no more than 2 stations in a local television market. With regard to the dual network rule, the NPRM seeks comment on whether a prohibition on mergers between or among the big 4 broadcast networks, which are ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, remains necessary to serve the public interest. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt the notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
In the last few weeks, we saw one of the most alarming attacks on the First Amendment in recent history. First, an ABC reporter was told that his coverage amounted to hate speech and he should be prosecuted simply for doing his job. Then this FCC threatened to go after the same network, seizing on a late-night comedian's comments as a pretext to punish speech it disliked. That led to a new low of corporate capitulation that put the foundation of the First Amendment in danger. This was no simple business decision. It was an act of clear government intimidation. And while the FCC does not have the authority, the ability, or the constitutional right to police lawful content or to punish broadcasters for speech the government dislikes, even the threat of revoking a license is no small matter. It poses an existential risk to a broadcaster which cannot exist without its license. Ultimately, after days of bipartisan pushback against this weaponization of government power, Disney backed off. However, For several days, the corporate behemoths who own large swaths of local stations across the country did not. That's because these billion-dollar media companies have business before the FCC. They will need regulatory approval of their transactions and are pushing to reduce regulatory guardrails so they can grow even bigger. That has left local stations trapped in the middle as these massive companies impose their will and their values upon local communities. This precise example neatly encapsulates the danger of allowing vast and unfettered media consolidation. This could drastically alter the media ecosystem and the number of voices that are a part of it. This notice of proposed rulemaking is one of multiple proceedings impacting the media ecosystem on which the Commission is expected to act in the near term. I think it is the right moment to give an overview of what is expected, how these actions are related, why it matters, and what is at stake. First, local broadcast journalism matters. It is a key element of the United States civic infrastructure that keeps our democracy strong. Over the past 2 years, I have traveled around the country meeting with stakeholders in all the industries we oversee. And almost everywhere I went, I have visited with a local television and/or a radio broadcaster. From a low-power FM station in the Boyle Heights neighborhood in Los Angeles to the NBC and Telemundo studios in Miami, Florida. One beauty of the local broadcasting model is that they are virtually everywhere. I am consistently blown away by local journalists' commitment to serving their local communities and their passion for their work. What we all need to understand is that even when you get your news on your phone, as opposed to from a local broadcast, the source of that news is very often a local broadcast journalist that does the hard work day in and day out. That means if there are fewer local broadcast journalists, there are fewer total journalists out there covering the stories that matter to communities and to the nation. This is on top of the loss of local journalists that resulted from the closures of so many local newspapers. Second, the media ecosystem has changed. As described in this item, the regulatory structure underlying broadcasting is complex and designed to, on the one hand, ensure a diversity of viewpoints are represented by precluding one entity from dominating the voices available in a community, and on the other hand, support a balance of negotiating power between large broadcasting networks that produce news and entertainment content, targeting a national audience, and locally licensed broadcasting stations that produce news and entertainment content that is targeted locally. Importantly, from this inception, the broadcasting ecosystem has provided free over-the-air programming nationwide, supported by advertising dollars. Advertising is a multi-billion-dollar business, and advertising decisions are driven by competitive market forces. The public has benefited as competition for viewers resulted in high-quality programming. As technology evolved over the last 3/4 of a century, there have been changes to our regulatory structure that were designed to maintain the balance between national and local broadcasters and to protect consumers. There are rules that set guardrails on how broadcasters negotiate with what we call multi-channel video programming distributors, or MVPDs, and also known as satellite and cable television companies, for the distribution of their content. One of the outcomes of these rules is a framework for payments from MVPDs and their subscribers to broadcasters that are referred to as retransmission consent payments. These payments are an additional important source of support for free over-the-air programming, and the proceedings I am describing will also impact the negotiating leverage among broadcasters and MVPDs. Broadcasters have been losing advertising dollars to digital alternatives for decades, but the rise of various streaming platforms, the decline of cable subscribers, and the shift driven by audiences getting news and entertainment through social media applications has been growing for some time and is upending the long-standing model. When broadcasters were the indisputably best advertising medium, broadcast advertising dollars were plentiful and could support multiple local broadcasting stations in most communities. The competition from all the digital platforms, which can deliver national or local targeted ad campaigns using personal data, The migration of high-value content such as live sports to alternative streaming platforms and the decline of MVPD subscriptions are having a very real impact on broadcasters' bottom lines. Not surprisingly, broadcasters are working on multiple fronts to keep their businesses financially viable in the digital age. Nobody can tell me that what the broadcasting industry is going to look like 5 or 10 years down the road. And importantly, not all broadcasters have the same incentives because they are often managing different collections of assets. So I'm going to walk through key aspects of several issues that are pending in different proceedings. This quadrennial review is looking at the prohibition against owning more than 2 broadcast stations in a market. The case for lifting the 2-station rule is that economic pressures, meaning reduced advertising and subscription dollars, can only be addressed by creating economies of scale through the use of shared resources such as real estate, personnel, and technology. The case against it is made clear in arguments I hear, such as from a consumer who wrote to me about the fact that 4 of the 5 stations in Eugene, Oregon, that broadcast local news are owned by a single entity. She raised concerns that the commonly owned stations all share the same crew, reporters, and on-air personnel, and stories for the local news programming. This means that although there are 5 stations with local news programs on air each day, there are really only 2 choices. I believe, this is the consumer, that limits the points of view available when it comes to local news stories. And since the local news programs also include some national news stories, the 4 stations owned by that one station group are all the same stories as reported by such same station group. In a second proceeding, the Commission is looking at raising the national ownership limit. That is, entities are prohibited from owning broadcast stations that reach more than 39% of the households in the United States. This issue created controversy in the past, and in 2004, Congress stepped in to ratchet back the FCC's prior action and to establish the national ownership cap we have today. Advocates for raising or eliminating the cap argue that it limits their ability to compete for national advertising campaigns that are necessary to support local broadcasting, which they are committed to. Opponents assert the local broadcasters owned by large station groups, which can be billion-dollar corporations, are not serving their local markets because they are broadcasting content advancing the corporate parent's national interests as if it was locally originated. Given the prior congressional action, I believe that only Congress can raise the cap. From a policy perspective, as explained in the item today, our regulatory structure is in large part based on a balance of power between the national networks with incentives to serve national interests and local broadcasters with incentives to serve their local communities. A significant question to be addressed is how would ownership of a group of local broadcasters that together reach the majority or all of the nation change the incentives of that station group? In the past 2 weeks, the public has raised serious concerns that large station groups made programming decisions to serve their national corporate interests, not their communities of license. What is the impact of letting them get even bigger? Finally, broadcasters are petitioning the Commission to impose a hard deadline requiring cutover to the next generation of broadcasting technical standards, generally referred to as Next-Gen TV or ATSC 3.0. While this sounds a little wonky, stick with me here for a moment to explain why it matters. Next-Gen TV is a new broadcasting standard that uses an IP format. Broadcasters can use this to evolve technologically and to provide additional services to better compete with digital platforms, though through both services they offer and through targeted advertising they will sell. It will allow more efficient use of spectrum, which will in turn free up spectrum for non-broadcasting services that they can monetize. There are many good things about this technology, but like everything else, it raises questions of costs and policy outcomes. Costs will be borne by manufacturers that will need to add technology to televisions to receive this broadcast, MVPDs that will need to change their equipment to receive the next-gen TV signals, and consumers that will need to purchase antennas for their existing TVs to receive the new signal over the air or potentially pay higher prices for new televisions. Importantly, the benefits of next-gen TV to broadcasters increase if the national ownership cap is raised or eliminated. A station group with a nationwide footprint and data about their audiences will be able to compete for national targeted advertising campaigns. They also plan to sell data casting services using the broadcast spectrum made available by the more efficient standard to, for example, broadly and efficiently transmit technical updates to devices such as phones and cars outside traditional broadband connections. This may well be a great use of spectrum, but we should certainly consider the policy implications of allowing this before it happens. These are all complex proceedings with more issues to resolve than I am even covering today. The financial pressures on local broadcasters are very real, as are the significant values of the local broadcasting services they provide to their communities of license. The Commission requires locally licensed broadcasters to serve their communities of license in the public interest. The key principles underlying this statement remain localism, viewpoint diversity, and competition. Financial gains for corporate giants is not a basis to abandon our and our broadcasters' obligations to serve the public interest. The question remains, however, what can we do? How do we move forward to maintain and grow this critical infrastructure of democracy that depends on the broadcast ecosystem? I do not fault the broadcasters and other industry stakeholders for looking out for their financial interests. That is their job. And I applaud the public interest advocates for pushing back against the notion that competitive pressures are more important than localism and viewpoint diversity. We need to ensure our rules prioritize viewpoint diversity and incentivize broadcasters to serve their communities of license. The broadcast ecosystem is a long-standing public-private partnership, and I call on all stakeholders to approach this pivotal moment with an open mind to identifying modifications to current rules that would both shore up the economics of broadcast television and preserve the public interest. This notice of proposed rulemaking is required by statute. I support seeking comment on these very important issues, and I look forward to productive engagement with stakeholders and remain focused on retaining rules necessary to serve the public interest. I appreciate the chairman, including my suggested edits in the NPRM, and I thank the Media Bureau staff for their good work on this complex matter.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. When Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, it recognized that competition could fundamentally reshape the audio and video media marketplace. To account for competitive dynamics, the Act directs the Commission to revisit its public interest evaluation of key radio and television ownership rules every 4 years, relaxing them as needed. Although the 2026 review is fast approaching, to adhere to our statutory obligations, it's important that we move forward with this NPRM for the 2022 review. The marketplace has been changing rapidly, driven by technological innovation and evolving consumer preferences. The growth of digital competition has brought new opportunities for consumers to benefit from more personalized viewing options. But it also requires us to carefully reassess whether our rules reflect today's reality and allows broadcasters to compete effectively for viewers, for programming and advertising in this highly competitive environment. The 2022 Quadrennial Review NPRM provides the Commission with a timely opportunity to do just that. Guided by the law and the record, I look forward to ensuring that our media ownership rules are appropriately modernized to reflect the current marketplace, and I remain committed to ensuring that broadcasters advance the public interest as Congress required in the Communications Act. I thank the Media Bureau for its excellent work on this item.
Thank you. Over the years at the agency, when we've addressed different issues, I've emphasized the importance of what I call the Gretzky test, keeping our eye on where the proverbial puck is going, not where it has been. Nowhere is that more important than with our media regulations. So as we kick off this quadrennial review, the FCC must do so with an eye to the future. After all, the old regulatory silos have been breaking down for quite some time. The Commission must move forward with a keen understanding of today's converged markets. And that's exactly what we're doing with this item. In fact, it may be fair to say that the Gretzky test is why Congress first required the FCC to conduct these quadrennial reviews back in 1996. They wanted us to consistently reassess market conditions to ensure our media ownership regulations were keeping pace with the times. In recent years, numerous online audio and video streaming services have emerged, fundamentally changing how broadcast radio and television compete in the media marketplace. Our broadcast ownership rules should reflect these changes. In fact, the FCC is required by law to review certain broadcast ownership rules every 4 years to determine whether those rules remain necessary in the public interest as a result of competition, which has traditionally meant advancing competition, localism, and viewpoint diversity. Now, the FCC has not always stuck to that statutory mandate. Indeed, just this year, the Eighth Circuit determined that the FCC acted arbitrarily and capriciously when it adopted the last quadrennial review order. In doing so, the court emphasized the deregulatory nature of the quadrennial review provisions that Congress added to the statute. Ultimately, the court vacated the FCC's decision to retain the top 4 rule, which prohibits a single entity from owning or controlling 2 of the top 4 television stations in a local market. We are ultimately guided by the court's decision here, and we intend to take a fresh approach to competition by examining the broader media marketplace rather than treating broadcast radio and television as isolated markets. Our primary goal is to promote investment in local broadcasters who provide trusted news and information vital to the communities they serve. We'll also consider whether public safety, national security, and other public interest goals should be part of this review. If we determine that any rule no longer serves the public interest, we will fulfill our statutory duty to modify or eliminate those rules. So thanks again to the team for all the great work on this item. In particular, I'd like to thank Susan Aaron, Ty Bream, Chad Go, David Conzel, Jin Lee, Lori Marburg, Kim Makuch, Michael Richards, Jamie Saloom, Andrew Wise, and Irene Wu. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty.
Approve.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 5, 6, and 7 on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. And for each item, Joseph Calichone, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction. Item 5 is titled Deleting Obsolete and Duplicative Wireline Rules.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Calichone, welcome back.
We're back.
Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition and Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus present a direct final rule which repeals certain wireline regulations that have been identified as obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary. Joining me at the table are Irina Asaskov, Assistant Division Chief in the Bureau's Pricing Policy Division, Matt Baker, Deputy Division Chief in the Bureau's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, and Ed Kratchmer, Deputy Division Chief in the Competition Policy Division. Also joining me at the table is Michael Scott, Deputy Division Chief in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau's Disability Rights Office. Ed will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. In March, the Commission launched the Delete, Delete, Delete proceeding to identify and eliminate unnecessary regulatory burdens. The direct final rule before the Commission today is the latest step in this continuing effort. Specifically, this item identifies 89 primarily wireline rule provisions totaling approximately 29,000 words and covering 386 regulatory burdens that plainly no longer serve the public interest because they govern obsolete technology, are duplicative, or no longer used in practice. The direct final rule finds that prior notice and comment is unnecessary under the Administrative Procedure Act because repealing these rules is a routine determination which will not have a substantial impact on the industry or the public. This item nevertheless elects to provide the public with the opportunity to file comments under the direct final rule process. Under this process, If no significant adverse comments are filed in response to this direct final rule, these rules will be repealed. If significant adverse comments are filed with respect to any of these rules, the Commission will publish a timely withdrawal in the Federal Register to ensure that any rules subject to such comments are not repealed. Finally, if the agency determines that comments are filed do not qualify as significant adverse comments, it will issue a public notice briefly explaining the basis for this determination. The Wireline Competition Bureau and Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau recommend that the Commission adopt the final rule and request editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Once again, I want to thank agency staff for identifying commission rules that may have outlived their usefulness. I know there is growing pressure to come up with potential rules for deletion to meet an arbitrary rule reduction quota, so I want to acknowledge their hard work. My process concerns, however, remain. The procedures today to erase rules adopted pursuant to notice and comment were put in place without seeking public comment on appropriate processes and guardrails. I cannot support the elimination of substantive rules contained in these procedures. This is particularly concerning when we're dealing with rules that involve accessibility issues. Many of the rules being removed through this process today involve the deaf and blind community. But this direct final rule does little to explain exactly how these changes may impact their ability to receive accessible equipment or make it harder for consumers with disabilities to lodge complaints or to understand their rights. Instead, we give the public just 20 days to review and understand the elimination of rules involving 387 policies they may not even be aware of and that are up for removal, and to file significant adverse comments that may or may not be deemed sufficient to stop that process. When it comes to eliminating long-standing protections for vulnerable populations, this is simply not enough. Take, for example, the case of the agency's review of our adherence to National Environmental Policy Act and National Historic Preservation Act reviews. Instead of making changes in a vacuum, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking has allowed remote and distant tribal communities to weigh in about the impact of abandoning those protections altogether. Through that process, the organized village of Kasan, a tribe in Alaska, has told us that Kasan Village is home to the only remaining Haida longhouse in the United States, and their lands contain burial sites, carving sheds, and traditional food harvesting areas. According to them, previous infrastructure projects have disrupted salmon spawning grounds and crab habitats, which are central to their food security and cultural practices. As this case shows, this is exactly why we give communities proper notice and comment periods. And so, while some of these are not substantive rules, I worry about the public's ability to properly assess the impact of the broader changes we're proposing here. For this reason, I dissent. I do acknowledge the work of the Wireline Competition Bureau, all the bureaus, sorry, with this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. With this item, the Commission advances its ongoing common sense effort to identify and eliminate rules that are obsolete, unused, or otherwise outdated and unnecessary. I thank the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and the Wireline Competition Bureau for their hard work on this item, and I look forward to future Commission actions that build on this important agency-wide initiative. Thank you.
Thanks. For the third monthly meeting in a row now, we're taking another big step forward in our large deregulatory effort that we call In-Ray Delete, Delete, Delete. Including this month's item, we've now teed up for elimination about 70,000 words, 158 pages, and over 800 rules or requirements from the FCC's books. This latest round primarily targets wireline-related rules and requirements that govern obsolete technology, are duplicative, or no longer used at all in practice. We're talking about rules that pertain to a wide variety of now defunct topics, such as antiquated distinctions between wireline carriers, technology that's been eclipsed, dates that have already passed. With this latest action, we're about now halfway through what I call the dead wood stage of our delete campaign. In this stage, we've been scrapping rules that have sat on the books for a long time that, again, were either overturned by courts or just very plainly overtaken by events. We've been going bureau by bureau to identify all of the low-hanging fruit that can be cut. Now, in this next upcoming phase 2 portion of our delete effort, we're going to take some more significant substantive whacks at the FCC rulebook. So be prepared to continuing experiencing deja vu as we move forward with our delete proceeding. For other great work on the item, I'd like to thank Ed Kratchmer, Matthew Baker, Audra Hale Maddox, Lauren Gary, Kate Dumichel, Irina Asaskov, Marv Sachs, Richard Kwiatkowski, Molly Bergdorf, Ike Ofobike, Stephen Wang, Michael Scott, Krista Thornton, Bob Aldrich, and Mark Stone. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Dissent.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes yes. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, next, item 6 on your agenda is titled Modernizing the E-rate Program for Schools and Libraries.
Thank you, Chief. When you and the team are ready, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a declaratory ruling that, if adopted, would align eligibility with Section 250, E-rate eligibility with Section 254 of the Communications Act and clarify that school bus Wi-Fi equipment and services are ineligible for E-rate funding. I'd like to thank the Bureau team and our colleagues in the Office of General Counsel for their hard work on this item. Sitting with me at the table are Allison Baker, Associate Bureau Chief, Nick Page, Chief of the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, John A. Schreiber, Deputy Division Chief, Kate Dumichel, Special Counsel, and Gabby Gross, Special Counsel, who will now present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today's declaratory ruling, if adopted, would find that the best reading of Section 254 of the Communications Act is that using and providing Wi-Fi on school buses satisfies neither the educational purpose test under Section 254 H1B nor the classroom test under Section 254 H2A, contrary to the Commission's prior interpretation of the statute in 2023. First, regarding Section 254 H1B's requirement that E-rate supported services be used for educational purposes, the item notes that the 2023 school bus Wi-Fi declaratory ruling cited no record evidence that schools could limit student use of Wi-Fi services on school buses to educational purposes, and finds that such use is at best incidental. Second, regarding Section 254 H2A's requirement that E-rate fund service to classrooms, the item finds that providing service to classrooms cannot mean funding service to any mobile location where learning may or may not take place. Rather, consistent with the Commission's well-established precedent, the item finds that the best reading of the statute is that E-rate support is limited to the school's network. Accordingly, the item directs USAC to deny as ineligible all pending requests for funding for school bus Wi-Fi in funding year 2025 and for subsequent funding years. Lastly, the item directs the Wireline Competition Bureau to release an amended version of the funding year 2025 eligible services list consistent with this action and with the assistance of USAC to modify any forms, procedures, and outreach materials as needed to remove references to the eligibility of these services. The staff recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Participation, transparency, and accountability are critical to the Commission's process. As the item before us today says, it is long-standing practice for the Commission to seek public input and collect information before making decisions with regard to the E-rate program's eligible services list. That is why the process failure before us is so concerning. The Commission generally releases copies of draft items scheduled for the monthly open meetings to the public 3 weeks before such meeting in order to allow stakeholders and interested parties to read the item and voice any concerns they may have. This process was implemented during former Chairman Pai's administration, serving the goal of transparency. Instead of following this well-functioning, long-standing practice, the order and reconsideration regarding Wi-Fi hotspots and the declaratory ruling regarding Wi-Fi on school buses were added to the September meeting agenda without releasing public drafts and just hours before the sunshine notice, the deadline after which parties can no longer meet with commissioners' offices. As a result, stakeholders and interested parties were not afforded the chance to read the items impacting their constituencies and were not afforded the chance to weigh in on the substantive details of each item. Public input is integral to the Commission's decision-making process, as it should be. That input is all the more critical when dealing with items that propose to strip funding from services on which schools and libraries currently rely. Removing E-rate funding for hotspots and Wi-Fi on school buses will force cutbacks in service and undoubtedly impact the way schools and libraries are providing educational support to students and patrons. Decisions of this magnitude, decisions that take resources away from people across the country, should never be made in the dark, behind closed doors. The Commission is supposed to serve the public, not sideline it. When we shut out the very communities our decisions affect, we fail in that responsibility. That said, I do want to acknowledge the work that the Wireline Competition Bureau did on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because the E-rate items before us this morning are closely related, I'll be making one statement that addresses both. Ensuring that all Americans can access the benefits of advanced communications is one of my highest priorities. The issues raised by the school bus Wi-Fi order and the E-rate hotspots order are indeed significant. We need only look at Congress's decision to establish the Emergency Connectivity Fund, a temporary program to provide broadband devices and services off-site from schools and libraries, to see how important these issues are. With the Emergency Connectivity Fund now ended, the Commission must determine how to proceed. My support for both items today rests on my commitment to apply what I see as the best interpretation and application of the law. As the Supreme Court has reminded us, an agency literally has no power to act unless and until Congress confers power upon it. And after Loper-Bright, the Commission cannot approach statutory interpretation with a thumb on the scale in its own favor. Our role is to apply the law using the same ordinary tools that a court would. That doesn't mean everyone will agree on what a statute requires. In my judgment, the interpretation reflected in these orders best reflects the statutory text in its context and the broader legal and regulatory framework. I recognize that some of my predecessors, among others, see the law differently. I respect their views and do not question their good faith. But I must act in good faith myself based on what I believe is the best understanding of Congress's direction. The Commission has a special responsibility to adhere to the limits Congress has set when spending public money through the Universal Service Fund. Under our Constitution, Congress's power of the purse is central to the system of checks and balances. For us, that means two things. First, that we must never exceed the limits Congress has placed on universal service support. And second, that we must carefully evaluate the financial consequences of our decisions to ensure that they are consistent with our statutory authority. In this way, we respect Congress's constitutional role while fulfilling our own. The Supreme Court's recent decision upholding the constitutionality of the Universal Service Fund reinforces my approach. Every universal service dollar ultimately comes from consumers, and the challengers in that case argued that Congress had failed to place sufficient limits on how the FCC spends those dollars. The majority disagreed, concluding that the policy expressed in Section 254 is clear and limiting, and any discretion exercised by the FCC must be tethered to legislative judgments. Justice Gorsuch, in dissent, pointed to the very hotspots order before us as an example of unbounded FCC discretion. My takeaway, staying firmly within the heartland of our authority, both honors the majority's reasoning and avoids the concerns that led the dissenters to a different conclusion. This approach reflects not only my legal commitments, but also my background working on Capitol Hill. Congress creates agencies like the FCC and defines their mandates. For government to work well, agencies must abide by those laws. In my view, the Commission risks missed opportunities when it attempts to go it alone, rather than working collaboratively with Congress. When the FCC goes it alone, it risks narrowing its focus. We have seen this before, as the Commission has sought to do more and more through universal service, even as the contribution base shrinks. Collaboration with Congress may not produce identical outcomes on identical timelines, but it could support modernized, more sustainable programs. It could also open the door to valuable dialogue. For example, when Congress enacted the Emergency Connectivity Fund, it provided limited funding for a limited time. And in 2024, Congress rescinded nearly $1.8 million in remaining funds. Congress clearly recognized the value of off-site support, but just as clearly chose to bring the program to an end. By proceeding alone, the Commission missed the chance to better understand Congress's reasoning, insights that could have informed our statutory framework and program oversight. Closing the digital divide requires an all-hands-on-deck approach that also includes private industry. By working with the private sector, in addition to Congress, the Commission can further broaden its thinking, learn from real-world experience, and pursue creative solutions beyond regulation alone, whether through infrastructure deployment of wired or wireless facilities, affordability initiatives, or digital literacy efforts. This kind of collaboration complements rather than substitutes federal programs like universal service. Now, I understand that not everyone will be satisfied with today's outcome, but I want to be clear, I remain committed fully to addressing the digital divide, ensuring that all Americans share in the benefits of broadband connectivity. I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for its hard work on these items, and I look forward to working with the chairman and other commission staff, as well as with Congress and other public and private stakeholders in the collective effort this mission demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress took specific legislative action to address connectivity issues during this unique period of time. It did so by authorizing the FCC to use a newly created Emergency Connectivity Fund to support eligible equipment and services at locations other than the school. At the time, I supported the agency's rules implementing that program, given the specific statutory authority from Congress, including for funding Wi-Fi connectivity on school buses. But when the COVID-19 emergency ended and the FCC's statutory authority for this particular program expired, rather than winding down the program, the FCC decided to keep it going. It sought to permanently expand the E-rate program despite clear statutory limits by including funding for Wi-Fi on school buses through a different and pre-existing statutory scheme. I raised objections at the time and called for a full accounting of ECF spending to help us better understand what worked and what didn't. Unfortunately, those calls went unanswered. Today's decision corrects course. It restores the FCC's commitment to following the law as written and respecting the intent of Congress as reflected in the text of the statute. In fact, Section 254 of the Communications Act is clear. E-rate funding is meant to enhance access to telecommunications services in classrooms and libraries. A school bus is neither. We cannot simply reinterpret the statutory term classrooms to mean any place where learning might occur. That's not how statutory interpretation works, and it's not how responsible policymaking should work either. So today's decision puts an end to the unlawful use of E-rate funds for Wi-Fi on school buses. It ensures we're acting within the bounds of the law and serving as good stewards of federal dollars, just as Congress intended. For all their great work on the item, I'd like to thank the FCC's team once again, in particular Allison Baker, Sarah Citron, Bradley Craigmile, Kate Dumichel, Gabby Gross, Andrea Kelly, David Consul, Richard Mallon, Molly O'Connor, Nick Page, Chris Santini, Johnny Schreiber, Derek Yo, and Chin Yu. We will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Gomez.
Dissent.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you announce the next, I think maybe last, item on today's lengthy agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 7 on your agenda, addressing the homework gap through the E-rate program, is your last item from the Wireline Competition Bureau and your final item today.
Chief Calhoun, you've got the same team, you're ready to go.
We now present an order on reconsideration that, if adopted, would rescind the E-rate rules adopted in July 2024 and prevent USF funding from being used for Wi-Fi hotspots. I'd like to thank the Bureau team, as well as our colleagues in the Office of General Counsel and the Office of Economics and Analytics for their work. Kate Dumichel will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today's order on reconsideration, if adopted, grants a petition for reconsideration of the July 2024 E-rate hotspots order and makes Wi-Fi hotspots and associated wireless internet services used by students and library patrons at their homes and other off-campus locations ineligible for E-rate support. Under Section 254 H1B of the Communications Act, telecommunications carriers must provide services to elementary schools, secondary schools, and libraries for educational purposes at discounted rates. The order concludes that the off-premises use of Wi-Fi hotspots and associated wireless internet services does not constitute an educational purpose, given the many ways they could be used. The order also concludes that the best reading of Section 254 H2A, which directs the Commission to promulgate rules to enhance access to advanced telecommunications and information services for all public and nonprofit elementary and secondary school classrooms and libraries, requires connectivity to be provided to schools and libraries, not student homes or wherever a library patron may travel. The proposed order also denies 2 other petitions for reconsideration of the July 2024 decision. To effectuate these changes, the item directs the Wireline Competition Bureau to release a public notice with an amended funding year 2025 eligible services list and instructs USAC to deny the pending funding year 2025 requests for Wi-Fi hotspots and services. Finally, the order directs the Bureau, with USAC's assistance, to update as needed the E-rate forms and outreach materials. The staff recommends adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, if any, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Broadband is the infrastructure of opportunity. Across the political spectrum, lawmakers have acknowledged the existence of the digital divide, the gap between those who have access to affordable, reliable broadband and those who do not. For more than 25 years, the FCC's E-rate program has helped us narrow the digital divide by making telecommunications and information services more affordable for schools and libraries. It has connected library patrons, empowered teachers, and equipped students with digital skills. Specifically, as noted, Section 254 of the Communications Act tasks the Commission with providing E-rate support to elementary schools, secondary schools, and libraries for educational purposes. Teachers, librarians, and parents alike understand that education is not confined to the 4 walls of a classroom or a library. The pandemic made this painfully clear. It showed us that learning occurs in all kinds of places, from the parking lot of a McDonald's to the steps outside of a public library. It would be incredibly naive for us to think that in our post-pandemic world, learning has returned to solely in-person and on-paper instruction. The era of homework by quill and candlelight is long gone and will never return. Technology and telecommunications services change year after year, and that's why Congress expressly authorized the Commission to update the E-rate program over time by designating additional services for support. In doing so, Congress gave the FCC permission to expand applications of E-rate funding as the technologies used to educate children evolve. When the E-rate program was implemented, dial-up internet was the standard, And today, September 30th, 2025, AOL is discontinuing dial-up service. It is safe to say the landscape of communications technology has changed dramatically throughout the life of the E-rate program. As underscored during my visit to the High School for Environmental Studies in New York a couple of weeks ago, students are now using Chromebooks in classrooms on a regular basis, and they are expected to submit homework assignments online using platforms like Google Classroom. These changes are made possible with support from E-rate funding. The Commission has long recognized this reality and expanded E-rate funding to cover new services, including those that provided off-site connectivity. For example, as early as 2003, the Commission expanded E-rate support to cover internet access for bookmobiles. It also clarified that E-rate funding could cover a school bus driver's use of wireless services while transporting students, a librarian's use of wireless service on a library's mobile library unit van, and teachers' use of wireless services while accompanying students on a field trip. Expanding E-rate support to cover hotspots and Wi-Fi on school buses was consistent with that precedent. These services matter most for students who would otherwise be left behind, such as students in rural areas who spend more time on school buses than most. For example, in the state of Arkansas, the longest school bus commute is 2 hours and 47 minutes each way, and the average school bus commute is nearly 50 minutes each way. Moreover, as of 2023, 1 in 3 rural students still had inadequate internet access at home. For these students, having access to hotspots at home or Wi-Fi on school buses can mean the difference between completing their homework and falling behind. Importantly, the characterization of these uses of funding as unsupervised screen time fails to acknowledge that the E-rate program has guardrails to ensure students' safety when using both hotspots and Wi-Fi on school buses. Those who receive E-rate funding are subject to the Children's Internet Protection Act, which requires that they employ technology protection measures to block or filter obscene or otherwise harmful content online. These are protection measures that are not even guaranteed for children using a home Wi-Fi connection paid for by their family. So let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Across the political spectrum, policymakers have identified global leadership in artificial intelligence as a national priority. But we cannot expect to lead if we fail to equip today's students and tomorrow's innovators and technologists with the digital skills they need to succeed. Without support for connectivity, that pipeline dries up, and in the long run, we and the communities lose out. We learned the same lesson from the Affordable Connectivity Program. It was the most successful tool our country has ever had to address the digital divide. When funding for the program lapsed last year, millions of households lost support, and without it, the struggle to afford reliable high-speed broadband continues to loom large. I strongly believe that Congress should establish another affordability program. If the Commission votes to take away funding for hotspots today, the need for a new affordability program will only become more urgent. The Commission's move to roll back federal funding for hotspots and Wi-Fi on school buses ignores our nation's educational landscape today and the need to equip students with digital skills for the future. These decisions benefit no one. Funding for hotspots and Wi-Fi on school buses comes from the existing E-rate budget. It will, however, make it harder for students to learn, harder for libraries to serve their community, and harder for us to close the digital divide. Because I cannot support turning the digital divide into a digital chasm, I dissent. I do, however, I apologize. I just have to do this. Have to acknowledge the hard work of the Wireline Competition Bureau. Now you can go.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the statement. Commissioner Gomez, you indicated you had one statement, but anything?
Trustee.
Trustee.
Thank you.
They keep moving.
Chairman Carr, it's all good. My statement on the previous item, yes, applies to this one as well, so I have no further remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to the team for the presentation. I have a separate statement for the record here. It obviously tracks very closely my prior statement on the prior items. I think the logic of the two is very similar. Congress passed a specific legislative enactment that was defined by the statute, defined for a period of time to address a unique moment in time of COVID-19. And when that program expired, so did the FCC's authority. And retreating back to the pre-existing statutory scheme of Section 254, which talks about enhancing access to telecom services in classrooms and libraries, doesn't give the FCC statutory authority to fund through the E-rate program connections to any remote location at which people might want to learn or read. And at the end of the day, the FCC is not alone in this conclusion. Earlier this year, members of Congress in both the Senate and House introduced a Congressional Review Act resolution aimed at overturning the FCC's prior approach on this issue. So I'm glad that the FCC is moving forward today to correct course, because our prior decision also suffered from some policy concerns as well. We moved forward with very little data. In fact, the little data that did exist showed that most hotspots that were implemented through these types of programs, the hotspots themselves were quickly lost or stolen, ultimately wasting millions of dollars. So the FCC, in my view, back then failed to demonstrate that these funding decisions would be advancing legitimate classroom or library purposes. But thank you again to the team for all the great work on this. Again, thanks to Allison Baker, Bradley Craigmile, Kate DuMichel, Joel Graham, Gabby Gross, Andrea Kelly, David Conzel, Richard Mallon, Molly O'Connor, Nick Page, Chris Santini, Johnny Schreiber, Derek Yo, and Chin Yu. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Gomez, getting this right this time.
Dissent.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. At this time, I will pause for a moment to see if any of my commission colleagues have any announcements that they would like to make. I'm going to extend that sentence, give you time to find,
Thank you.
the piece of paper.
I do, thank you, have an announcement. I would like to introduce Jocelyn Brooks. Jocelyn, we make you stand up. Jocelyn is a third-year law student at WashU Law who is interning full-time in my office this fall. She grew up in Austin, Texas, and attended Trinity University, where she majored in political science and communication and wrote a senior honors thesis creating a new digital literacy curriculum for Texas second graders. Jocelyn previously interned for Judge Christina Bryan in the Southern District of Texas, as well as for a London solicitor's office. Jocelyn is currently an editor on the WashU Law Review and has a Portuguese water dog named Addie.
Nice. Bring your dog to work, Dale. Commissioner, any announcements?
Yes, so it's been a while since we've had an open meeting, so I'll formally announce staff who have joined within the last several weeks. So Marcus Mayer has joined my office as a senior legal advisor. Yes, a machine, covering wireline enforcement, media, and consumer issues. Fatima Brown has also joined as a staff assistant, where before she was with the Space Bureau. And Will Holloway has agreed to serve as a permanent legal advisor, covering wireless, space, international engineering and technology, and public safety issues. They're terrific, so if you don't know them, please get a chance to.
Yeah, great team. Thanks, Commissioners. Before we adjourn, I'd like to make a few announcements of my own, both my office and the building more generally. First up is Allison Howell, if you do the required standing up. Allison recently joined my office as a law clerk. She just graduated in May from Pepperdine's Caruso School of Law. Allison is no stranger to the commission. She interned both in our wireless and wireline bureaus, and previously was an intern in my office when I was a commissioner. Previously, she clerked for a federal judge in the Southern District of Texas and as a research assistant to a constitutional law professor. Having had Allison be in the office and in the building before, she's really hit the ground running and helping on a lot of initiatives that we're running out of the chair's office. So thanks so much to Allison for joining the team. Next up are our honors attorneys. I think you guys are all roughly here, is that right? You guys can either stand up individually or together, but there's sometimes safety in numbers if you want to do that. But I'm pleased to announce 5 honors attorneys who joined the commission this month. Please stand, I guess, and be recognized as I go through it. But Amanda Igra. Amanda, thanks so much, joined the Office of General Counsel. Devin Loveland. Devin is joining the Media Bureau. Sarah Ramju, who's not here today, will be joining the Wireline Competition Bureau. Andrew Ware is joining the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. And finally, Delaney Wood has joined us in the Space Bureau. Previously last year, Marie Bordelon joined the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Claire Mendez joined in the Office of General Counsel. So congratulations to the 2024 and 2025 classes of honors attorneys. I recently had the chance to sit down with this group and have some lunch and talk with them, and I can assure you that they are a very smart, talented group. And as I explained to them then, they've already accomplished far more at this age than I had ever accomplished. I applied to the FCC's Honors Attorney Program and got rejected from the Attorney's Honor Program, but that's okay. That's okay. You know, don't take it personally. But congratulations to this really, really talented group. We look forward to all the great work you're going to do across the building. Next up is, some applause, I guess. Let's do it. A round of applause. Next up is some FCC retirements. Bill Huber of the Office of General Counsel has retired after over 25 years at the Commission. During his time at the agency, Bill served in the Wireless Bureau and OEA, where he managed the legal team running dozens of Spectrum and USF auctions. Bill also served for several years in the role of the FCC Bike Coordinator, helping to ensure that our headquarters' fantastic bike facilities are used to promote bike commuting here at the agency. Wishing Bill a smooth ride into the future. We got to murder that one. Like the chairman's dinner is like still a month and a half away. We got to work up to some better material over time here. Terrence Judge, Information Management Specialist in the Wireline Bureau, is retiring from the agency after 34 years of service. He serves as the Wireline Bureau's contracting officer, budget specialist, head webmaster, and the technical point of contact for a lot of the IT issues there. So we wish Terrence and his family all the best as they embark on new opportunities. Crystal Caesar, Crystal's administrative management specialist in the Wireline Bureau, retiring from the commission after 33 years of service. Crystal is the Wireline Bureau's primary point of contact on PRA issues. She collaborates with division managers, attorneys, and economists to meet all of the Bureau's obligations and workflows. So we wish Crystal and her family all the best in retirement. Alex Johns is retiring after 29 years of service. She started her career in the Cable Services Bureau all the way back in 1996. And other than one exciting year serving as legal advisor to Commissioner Copps, she's spent almost her entire FCC career in the Competition Policy Division of Wireline, where she's worked on many, many telecom rulemakings, too many to count, spent time reviewing transactions and forbearance petitions, and critically has mentored so many folks here at the agency. We wish Alex and her family well on all the great adventures ahead. Tim Dates. Tim is retiring from the FCC after 26 years in the Office of Managing Director. Throughout his tenure, Tim has played a vital role in advancing the agency's mission, contributing his expertise across numerous initiatives with integrity and professionalism. Tim's dedication to solving difficult issues while always maintaining a calm demeanor have meant a lot to his team and staff throughout the agency. We thank Tim for his remarkable run in public service. After 25 years of dedicated service, Auricio DeLone is retiring from the agency. Throughout his career, Auricio played a pivotal role in modernizing the agency's systems and processes by improving the delivery of information technology solutions. Sometimes you do that by removing them, I've found. He's brought a steadfast commitment to delivering real results for us. We thank Auricio for his exceptional contributions and wish him continued success in his next chapter. We just had a big party here at the agency, but after 34 years of dedicated service, Keturah Jackson is retiring from the Office of the Secretary, a big loss for us. I don't know who's going to be on the from line for all those emails I get daily from the Secretary's office, but we'll find somebody. Her commitment to excellence, customer service, and her expert approach to her role have made a lasting impact on the agency and her colleagues. Her positive attitude, collegial nature will be greatly missed. We thank Keturah for her outstanding contributions and wish her all the best in this new exciting chapter. After 25 years of public service, Celia Lewis is retiring from the FCC, closing a great career that began 16 years ago in the old Enforcement Bureau. From her early days learning alongside attorneys and engineers to contributions across multiple bureaus, Celia worked her way up through the FCC, ultimately going to law school, becoming an attorney herself. Celia leaves with deep gratitude from all of us here, having hit countless milestones and accomplishments, and we're very excited to see what she accomplishes next. Andy Mulitz. Andy joined what used to be the Tariff Division all the way back in 1991. Over the following 34 years, he worked as the legal branch chief in the Accounting and Audits Division, chief of the Compliance and Oversight Group in the Office of Managing Director, and then as an attorney advisor in the Enterprise Acquisition Group. Andy has been a dedicated public servant, and we wish him all the best as he leaves the agency. Keith Morgan. Keith is retired from the commission in September after nearly 8 years of service as Deputy Bureau Chief in the Enforcement Bureau's front office. During his time in EB, Keith oversaw portfolios including investigations and hearings, market dispute resolution, the fraud division, and the telecom consumer division. So Keith's good nature, his calm demeanor, and his excellent legal skills will certainly be missed across EB and the agency. Stephen Hansen has retired from the commission after 23 years of federal service. He retires from the Spectrum Enforcement Division, same division that I started out as an intern all the way back in 2002, 2003, where he was Deputy Division Chief. Steve was instrumental in many public safety related and enforcement cases. While in Spectrum Enforcement, we thank him for all of his service. Johnny Joe Garrity, a field agent in the Chicago office, is retiring after over 30 years of government service. Johnny Joe helped lead as the regional director, and his team has been on some very important investigations, administrative tasks, and special projects over the years. Johnny's going to spend the first year of his retirement enjoying time with his family and friends. Apparently after that, he'll be done with them, and he will then start participating in group activities, including bicycling, it's just what it says, bicycling, kayaking, and pickleball. Pickleball is a great sport, but you can really blow an Achilles out if you're not too careful. Tracy Randolph. Tracy has spent 23 and a half years working to assure that persons with disabilities have access to communications products and services and helping to protect the viability of our TRS fund. Tracy has worked on policy matters with CGB and Wireline, supported OIG, as well as the TRS fund administrator. Her commitment and expertise will be greatly missed. Only a handful of more. Micah Severe. Micah is retiring after nearly 32 years of federal service at the Commission. Micah, an attorney in CGB's Consumer Policy Division, served in a variety of roles across the agency before joining CGB in 2018. As she embarks on this new chapter, Micah looks forward to spending time with her family, especially her granddaughter, and to gardening, traveling, and volunteering. So we thank her for all her contributions and hard work. Kamala Hart is retiring after 35 years of federal service, including 29 years here at the FCC. She served in different roles throughout the agency before finding a great home in CGB. She plans to travel and continue her quest to become the ultimate pickleball queen, I'm told. There's a lot of pickleball going on at this point in the agency. We thank her for all her contributions and hard work. Wish her the best. Two more, Douglas Klein. Doug Klein is retiring from the FCC's Public Safety Bureau. We served as a communications security specialist. Doug joined the FCC first all the way back in 1989. Among his many accomplishments, Doug managed the FCC's communications security program, created the FCC's technical surveillance countermeasures program, and served as the agency's certified locksmith. We wish him well in his retirement and thank him for his 36 years of meritorious accomplishments. Finally, Barb Kunkel is retiring after 3 years in public service. That seems like a small time compared to most of the rest of the group here. But in the Bureau, Barb accomplished a lot in those 3 years. Barb worked on 911 matters, including Carey's Law compliance, the annual 911 fee reports, and prior to the FCC, Barb served 17 years in the state of Michigan, including the Public Service Commission there. We wish Barb all the best in her next chapter. And that is the end of announcements for this month. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next date for the Commission's monthly agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Tuesday, October 28th, 2025.
Thanks. Until then, we stand adjourned.
Check 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, all right.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for getting all in place. I don't have to bang a gavel or anything like that. So we're going to be starting our chairman's press conference momentarily. As a reminder, if you could just please identify yourself and your outlet, and we'll be taking one question from each reporter. And now I'm going to just riff until the chairman comes out, but thank you again for being here today. Here we are. And with that, here's the chairman. Thank you all.
Well, thanks so much. It's been, I guess, almost 2 months since we saw you all last. I'm glad to see so much interest in the FCC. I haven't seen this much interest in the agency since one of our net neutrality fights that we went through, but all are welcome. It's so good to see everybody. With another busy month here at the agency, executing our Build America agenda. We went through wireline infrastructure, wireless infrastructure. For me, I'm particularly pleased at the progress we made here on contraband cell phones. It's an issue that I and others have been focused on for quite a while. I think it's a really important public safety matter that has flown under the radar for a lot of people. So I'm glad that we're seeking comment there. Separately, obviously, we are proceeding apace with our plans in the event that there is a government shutdown. We have our furlough notices that are ready to go. We have public-facing documents and guidance that will come out down the road here. But hopefully, at the end of the day, it's not needed. But we are ready to go at the agency, and we'll have further public-facing guidance for stakeholders and internal guidance for staff, and that happens. But beyond that, we're just continuing to execute on an aggressive agenda. So with that, happy to open it up down here.
Hi, Chairman Carr. Chris Cole with Law 360. I just wanted to ask, you had kind of indicated during the delete item that you had maybe another tranche of regulations you wanted to look at next that was perhaps more substantive. Could you give us a better idea of what you're saying there?
Yeah, basically, it's just a high-level point where this first phase, we've had all of the Bureau and offices go through their portions of the CFR and basically bucket things into what's, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit in terms of rules and regulations that have been overtaken by events or invalidated by courts, but nonetheless stayed on the books. We're sort of getting to the end of that project, and we're going to be looking, bigger picture, more deregulatory items. I don't know per se that we're going to do sort of individual delete initiatives in this next tranche. It may be that you see it as part of, broader proceedings, but, we're in the midst of transitioning to it, but no sort of substantive announcement on that front for you.
Hi, Chairman. Kelsey Griffiths with Bloomberg News. You've spoken many times about how you want to empower local stations to make decisions about what they air that would best serve their communities. But in the Jimmy Kimmel matter, it was not the individual local stations that pulled his show from the air, but it was two large station group owners that amount to about 23% of ABC's national audience. I wanted to ask, how do you square that desire to encourage local stations to serve their communities with your advancement today of an inquiry that would potentially let large station owners and networks both amass more power?
Well, on part of that first question, those station group owners are the owners of the local stations. They have managers in each of the communities. And I mean, look, going back even to last year, I wrote a letter to Disney, to Bob Iger, and I talked very specifically about sort of the North Star approach that I'm going to be taking when it comes to media regulation. I said then that you can really divide the media ecosystem into two main buckets. You have the national programmers, Disney, ABC, Paramount, Comcast, Fox. They aren't licensed by the FCC in that capacity. They have no public interest obligation. On the other hand, you have the local TV stations, either individually owned or owned alongside other stations and other markets. They are licensed. And what I said there back then is I want to find ways to empower those local TV stations to feel like they can push back on the national programmers when they decide that the programming doesn't meet their assessment of the public interest needs in that particular community. And what we saw the last 2 weeks was probably for the first time, maybe 20 or 30 years, local TV stations, the actual licensed entities that are tied to specific communities, pushing back and saying that they did not want to run particular national program. I think that's a significant win if your goal is to empower local TV stations to comply with their public interest obligations.
Just to follow up there, if I may, you're talking though about the local stations, but we saw these large station owners making that decision for multiple
But those are the local stations.
stations,
Those are
right?
the local.
But do you have concern about these station owner groups getting larger and kind of exerting that power over more local stations?
But they are the local stations. There's not three entities here. There's not national programs, station owners, and local TV stations. There's two entities here. There's national programmers and there's local TV stations in their ownership structures. And we want to, I think, empower those licensed local TV stations. There's lots of ways you could do it. Ownership reform may be one way that you could empower the station groups to continue to look out for their national interests. Again, I was pretty clear about this last year, so I don't think anybody should really be surprised. I think the balance of power as between national programmers, Comcast, Disney, Paramount, others, as compared to the balance of power with local TV station has gone completely out of whack over the last dozen or so years. I've been in this job since 2017, and there's numerous times that local TV stations or their ownership groups come to me and say, listen, I would love to preempt this program, but I don't think I have the power to do that because the national programmers have so much leverage over us. And so to the extent that local TV stations, maybe for the first time, feel empowered to stand up for their assessment of the needs of their local communities, I think that's a good thing. And that's something that I want to continue to see because the consolidation of power into sort of New York and Hollywood where these national programmers are based, I don't think that's a good thing. So I've been very clear, we want to empower locals. I think that happened here for the first time. They felt like they could stand up for themselves. I think it's a good thing, and I hope that we can see potentially more of that going ahead.
Hi, Commissioner. Jim Rutenberg from the New York Times. Thanks for doing this today.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of weeks, we've seen from you a lot of discussion about individual programs. I think last week you had mentioned, or maybe 2 weeks ago, within the last 2 weeks, The View as something maybe the FCC should look at in terms of whether it's bona fide news. Is there going to be much more activity sort of out of the FCC itself, not from the station level or the local level, looking show by show whether these national programs are meeting, or syndicated programs are meeting the the public interest standards or equal time considerations? How deep do you expect to go from the perch of the FCC?
One of the things I've been pretty clear about is I think for, again, several years or decades, the FCC has walked away from enforcing the public interest standard when it comes to local broadcasters. Again, national programmers, other than the station groups that they own, aren't licensed by the FCC. And I don't think the FCC walking away from enforcing the public interest standard has been a good thing. Again, remember, local broadcasters, and this is why having sort of a national debate about this is a little bit complicated. I think there's been a bit of a crash course for people, but trying to educate mass media on the intricacies of the Communications Act and broadcast law, I think has been interesting to observe. But again, licensed broadcast TV is fundamentally different than other distribution means. Cable shows are different, right? Cable shows are not licensed by the FCC. You can like it or not like it, but on licensed TV, which again has been given originally spectrum for free, a unique license to operate on specific megahertz, which denies other people the ability to do that, special statutory protections as well. There come with it public interest obligations. That means there's a news distortion policy at the FCC. There's a broadcast hoax rule. There's the public interest standard itself. There's indecency rules, obscenity rules, there's KidVid. So licensed broadcast is fundamentally different. Those obligations don't apply to cable, they don't apply to streaming, they don't apply to the person on the soapbox on the street. And so what I've said is all across the board, I want to reinvigorate the FCC's enforcement of the public interest standard and all of the various different rules and permutations that come from it. And that's what we're going to do. But I think it's necessary. I mean, again, if you look back, it's not just my opinion, but when it comes to sort of legacy national news, I mean, trust has just been in an absolute nosedive. It used to be that, legacy mainstream media could say, well, we're at least more sort of trusted than Congress, but now they've fallen even below Congress. So I think the FCC stepping back from the public interest obligation is not something that has been a good thing. But we're going to keep enforcing it.
Just a follow-up. So we look back to FCC Chair Fowler under Reagan as sort of the icon for most Republicans I've ever spoken about.
You guys look back at a lot of Republicans and say they're the icon, but I don't think they got the icon treatment at the time.
But Fowler
people
was,
love Ajit Pai now, which I think is amazing. That guy was like the most vilified FCC chair, and people are like, well, if we only had Ajit Pai, we'd be so much better off.
Well, that's I don't know. I'm just saying historically, for my Republican sources, I've always pointed to Fowler's. This is the Republican way on what we think the FCC's role should be. So do you?
It's 2025. I don't know.
Right,
I don't know why.
I'm just asking. Do you personally feel like Fowler went too far because he sort of set the tone? Like, do you see his legacy as now needing a corrective?
Look, I have no comment on the Fowler chairmanship. Honestly, I don't even recall all the particulars, obviously, at this point of what happened during that time. But what I can tell you is, over the last dozen or so years, the FCC walking away from enforcing the public interest standard, I don't think is us complying with the laws passed by Congress. Look, it's fine if Congress wants to say, listen, we no longer want licensing obligations on broadcast. We don't want the public interest standard. We don't want news distortion. Congress can do that. But until they do, we have to enforce the law. And again, if broadcasters don't like it, they can turn their license in and they can go to a different type of platform. They can become full-time streamers. They can go to cable shows. They can become podcasters. Or maybe there's a future in which we have some sort of auction and broadcasters can bid to get out from under the public interest obligation and have something that looks much more like a flexible use license. But again, licenses come with conditions. And we've done that across the board at the agency. Just look separately, mobile wireless, right? I issued a letter earlier this year to Dish EchoStar when concerns were raised about their compliance with their license conditions. The consequence, had the FCC determined that they hadn't met their license conditions, now again, it's different. One's like build out, one's public interest. I understand they're different, but they're conceptually the same. If we had reached the determination that they didn't build out and comply with their license obligations, their license conditions, then they lose their license. And the same thing applies in broadcast. Spectrum licenses, broadcast licenses are not property rights. And if you don't abide by your license, then you're putting the license at risk. And so we're going to sort of vigorously move forward on this.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Barr from The Guardian. I was wondering, do you think, do you have any regrets about the way that you phrased your comments about public interest standard, sort of the easy way or hard way? Do you think that was kind of characterized? You obviously became kind of a national figure, one of the most talked about people in the country. Do you think that you would have made your point in a different way in terms of what you meant about the actions that the networks and affiliates can take?
Well, look, I think when you look back and you look at the full words that I said, the full context of the interview, I think it's very clear what I was talking about. More specifically, it was very clear what I was not talking about. There was no threat made or suggested that if Jimmy Kimmel didn't get fired, that someone was going to lose their license. I've seen that there's a lot of Democrats that are writing letters saying that that is what happened, and it simply didn't. But look, I think for a lot of Democrats, this has really been about distortion and projection. It's been distortion because, again, if you look at my exact words, that's not what I said. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at the actual words that the companies that were involved in this said. Between Nexstar and Sinclair and Disney itself, I think they've each gone through 3 or 4 waves of comments, and every single time they have spoken about the fact that they made this decision as a business decision based on their assessments, either of their brand at Disney or for the local stations, their assessment of the needs of the community at a sort of very unique moment in time that they made those decisions, that it wasn't based on pressure. But I think it's been projection too, because it's interesting to me. The very same Democrats that are saying that I said something that I didn't are the same ones that engaged in that exact same type of conduct that they claim that I did. So a lot of these senators, for example, in 2018, they wrote a letter to the FCC, about a dozen Senate Democrats, calling on the FCC to investigate Sinclair, one of the stations involved here, for what? For, in their view, a pattern of what they viewed as news distortion. They told the FCC to take action up to and including revocation of their license. Right? So the actual license revocation threat came from a dozen Senate Democrats in 2018. But I don't remember that being a national story. I mean, you can correct me, you can raise your hand if anyone here wrote about that story. It didn't happen. Subsequently, during the Biden years, this FCC failed to renew dozens and dozens of routine license renewals for Sinclair in the wake of that. In 2023, this FCC determined to be in the public interest to move forward with seeking public input on the possible revocation or loss of a Fox Philadelphia broadcast TV station for content aired on Fox News Cable, which is not something that comes within that particular proceeding that they had teed up. So there is actual instances here of pressure from the government, but it's the same Democrats that are claiming it here that have engaged in it. Again, we just saw last week, Google came out and said that it banned people or content that complied fully with their policies after repeated and sustained pressure from the Biden administration. Back in 2021, Democrats in Congress wrote letters to cable companies, essentially pressuring them to drop Fox News and OAN and Newsmax because of their newsroom's decisions. And in fact, many of those cable channels were, in fact, dropped. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I think ultimately, I think there's a lot of Democrats here that have engaged in distortion of what happened and, frankly, projection for their own past conduct.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, were you disappointed that Nexstar and Sinclair started airing the show again?
I wouldn't say I was disappointed. I mean, look, these are decisions ultimately that were for them to make, both the ultimate decision to preempt and the decision to put them back on. Fundamentally, the question, again, of the balance of power between Disney and local TV stations is still one that weighs predominantly in Disney's hands. So the ability of a local TV station that wants to preempt, they can only do that so long before the economic pressure and the pressure generally becomes too much for them. So for my part, I'm very pleased that, again, for the first time in maybe 20 or 30 years, you had TV stations that says, we don't think this fits right now, at this moment in time, the communities we serve. Again, you're talking, places like Utah, and they exerted the right to preempt. But I don't think there was ever an expectation on my part that they'd be able to do that for any sort of real sustained period of time. But maybe now there is a permission structure here where they feel like they or other groups or local stations can push back. Because again, I think we got to shift the power. It's New York and Hollywood are not licensed by the FCC. They don't have a public interest obligation, but the local broadcast stations do.
Thank you.
Hi, Chairman. Diego Munoz from Punchbowl News. You've spoken extensively about the Democratic criticism of your remarks regarding Jimmy Kimmel. But there were also a lot of Republican criticism from senators like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and even former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Could you address the GOP criticism of your remarks? And have you spoken with Senator Cruz since he made his remarks?
Look, I think I've addressed now in multiple different contexts. I was speaking at a conference in New York. I think there's been a full and robust sort of national airing of these views. And again, my position has been that there's a lot of Democrats out there and the media that took one sentence of an interview that I said and took it out of context. And I've been pretty clear that when it comes to those particular Democrats, this has been sort of an episode, in my view, of projection and of distortion. I think what's clear is when I was speaking there, we were talking, again, fundamentally about news distortion complaints. When it comes to news distortion complaints, there's an easy way that those can be dealt with. Either the TV stations and the national programmers can work it out, or the potential complainant can work it out privately. I think we see that actually a lot. Or there's another way, which is people can file news distortion complaints at the FCC, and that's happened, in which case we have to run an FCC process on that. But again, I think there was a lot in the media on the Democrat side that misrepresented the statement in the context of what was said.
So do you think Senator Cruz and these other Republicans also took your remarks out of context?
Look, I have no comment on that. I mean, obviously you're free to ask them about, their views. What I've been clear about is that if you look at the full context, not only of what I said, but of what the companies themselves have said about their decision, it was a business decision. But when it comes to, Chairman Cruz and others, we have a great working relationship. We work well on lots of items. In fact, there was a couple items here today that he's been a real strong leader on in the Senate. We've done, visits and work together, and we're going to continue to have a great working relationship going forward on the FCC's matters.
Thank you, Chairman. Ted Johnson from Deadline. Back in 2019, you wrote on Twitter, should the government censor speech it doesn't like? Of course not. The FCC does not have a roving mandate to police speech in the name of the public interest. Now, as FCC chair, you have cited the public interest obligations of broadcasters as you've singled out Jimmy Kimmel, The View, other late-night hosts, CBS News. Isn't that policing speech?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Look, one, and I'll get to the quote that you're talking about, but a lot of these quotes that have resurfaced, again, sort of fundamentally misunderstand the difference between licensed broadcast and other forms of distribution. When it comes to social media platforms, when it comes to the internet, my position is very clear. They're not licensed. They have no public interest obligation, and I want to see there a robust, wide open, uninhibited debate. The context of what you're saying with that particular quote had to do with a proposal to ban, I think, vaping products on TV, untethered to anything. It wasn't tethered to, an existing FCC rule like news distortion. It wasn't tethered to anything like broadcast hosts. It wasn't tethered to some sort of determination, either by Congress or potentially by FDA, that there's certain, health or other issues related to this thing. So it was an untethered to FCC precedent. Here, what we're doing is very straightforward. We're just reminding people that the public interest standard exists. There's news distortion, a specific concrete thing. There's broadcast hoax, a specific concrete thing. And there's your need to be responsive to the needs of your local community. So again, I think it's apples and oranges at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Chairman Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah, it's enjoyable, mostly.
You've indicated in the past, recently, that the agency might look at The View and other programs in determining whether they are bona fide news programs. How would the agency go about determining what's a bona fide news program? And is that determination something that's in the public interest?
We might look at that. I mean, look, Congress was very clear that, again, because of the unique nature of broadcast television and the license, Congress put in place certain sort of political regulations around elections. So, for instance, when you're within a set period of time, I don't know, 60 or 90 days of an election, the FCC still has an equal opportunity, or what's commonly referred to as an equal time rule. This, in fact, was what was at issue when Vice President candidate Harris went on SNL right before the last election. So if you're within that period of time and you put one candidate on, there's an equal time and equal opportunity obligation with respect to opposing candidates. There's an exception to that rule called the bona fide news exception, that if your operation is in fact a bona fide news program, it is exempt from those sort of protection rules that would otherwise apply. Over the years, the FCC has provided various guidance as to that. For instance, I think there's some view, for instance, that the FCC has broadly said that the sort of the opening couch cushion interview of late night programs, that portion of a late night show, I think historically it says might be a bona fide news program, but the rest of it, if there's skits or a candidate is involved in a skit, that's not going to be subject to bona fide news, therefore equal time would apply. And what I've said, like I've said across the board, is I think we should be refreshing and reinvigorating our approach across the board. So there may come a time where it's appropriate for the FCC to take a look at the bona fide news exemption and perhaps sunset any guidance that's been out there. For any program, right, left, center, doesn't matter to me, come back to the FCC in light of how your program operates today, and make the case that you should qualify for the bona fide news exception. Because again, it's an exception to sort of a fundamental sort of political fairness regulation. So my position has been, just because the FCC has put out guidance before in different circumstances, that's not necessarily going to guide today. And so maybe we should go forward with some sort of guidance that generally sunsets previous guidance on bona fide news and opens windows if people want it to come in and apply for it newly based on current facts and circumstances.
Oh, sorry. Chairman Pye, Carr, Dave Sheridan, I got Chairman Pye on the mind.
He's going to be very
Sorry.
mad that you said that.
Sorry, Chairman Carr. You
You're
referenced
libel
Chairman,
action against you.
You referenced Chairman Pye, and back in 2017, President Trump asked him to pull the license of NBC over a news broadcast, and he said he would not do it, and that he would stand for the First Amendment as chairman. We're in a similar situation now where President Trump has asked you to look at licenses saying that 97% of the content of news broadcasts are negative. Do you believe that the FCC has authority to pull the licenses of broadcasters based on the content of news programs specifically? And could you talk about, do you think more needs to be done to address precisely what the public interest standard is, as some on both sides of the aisle suggested?
Well, look, you're going to have to ask, Chairman Pye about Chairman Pye's statements. I've been pretty clear about my view. With respect to your point about public interest, maybe, look, I think the public interest standard over the years has taken on, a fairly defined meaning. Again, in particular context, you have news distortion, broadcast hoax. But maybe there comes a point in time where the agency should open up a broader proceeding on the public interest standard and get comment from people and potentially provide additional guidance. I'm not sure it's necessary. But maybe that's something that we do down the road as part of reinvigorating the public interest standard, is seeking comment on whether there's more clarity, more guidance we can provide. Again, we're going to hold broadcasters to the public interest standard. There's a range of different actions the FCC can take. But ultimately, we have to apply the law passed by Congress. If someone is engaged in a pattern of news distortion, if someone is engaged in promotion of DEI in a way that crosses a line into sort of a pattern of significant discrimination based on race and gender, these are all things that could raise pretty significant questions under the public interest standard.
And can I ask you, Chairman Cruz said that your comments were, quote, dangerous as hell, and raised concerns that conservative radio stations and others in a future Democratic administration could be targeted under the same standard that you're adopting or you're advancing today. How do you address that, and how do you ensure that if you do something today, it doesn't end up hurting conservative broadcast voices in the future?
I'm very sensitive to that exact same type of concern. We don't want to see weaponization of government by any administration against any perspective, and that's certainly not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're engaged in enforcing the unique set of regulations, the public interest standard, that applies to broadcasters. And I would simply add, to your point, what we're doing right now stands on the precedent set by the prior FCC. It would be difficult to take some of the actions we do today because the agency operates by case law, operates by precedent, but for the agency moving forward with certain items during the last administration. Again, it was the Biden administration that sought comment on effectively not renewing or revoking a local Fox broadcast TV station. It was Democrats in Congress that sought to pressure the FCC to not approve a sale of a Spanish language radio station in Miami based on those Democratic officials saying it would decrease their odds of winning the 2022 midterm election. It was a Democrat prosecutor in Baltimore that filed a formal complaint with the agency asking us to punish a local broadcast TV station for coverage of alleged corruption of that official. And so my view is we're ending an era of weaponization and focused on fair and even-handed treatment for everyone that comes before the FCC. And I'll simply add, look, I have no doubt that there are a lot of people out there that benefited from a two-tiered system of justice during the last administration to which even-handed treatment feels like discrimination to them, but it is not.
Hi, Chairman. Allison Mollenkamp, CQ roll call. Looking at the E-rate items today, there were complaints both from Commissioner Gomez and from congressional Democrats.
E-rate, I gotta free my mind from the Kimmel questioning and come to you on reorienting.
Yeah, back to the agenda. Those items were added late. Was there a reason for the late addition, and do you feel like the Commission had enough time to get public input on those items?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, these are items that were circulated internally more than 3 weeks ago. These were items for which we provided I think, a press release at the time that we did it that provided everybody, I think, with sort of very detailed understanding of what it was that the agency was going to do. Right now, we're 3 commissioners at the agency, and because of that, we have no must-vote rules. And so the only way that we can sort of make sure that we get things voted in a timely way, now, oftentimes we work very well together to do that, but in the main, the only backstop we have is to put things on the meeting agenda. So this is one that was, again, publicly described more than 3 weeks ago. It's not a complex item in terms of the puts and takes. Everyone, I think, sort of understands the statutory issue at play, the policy issues at play, and ultimately, when we're looking to next year's funding year, we reached the view that it was important to get these done now so we can then move to the next phase, which is providing clarity for the funding year. So for instance, some states or local school districts that want this can shift to other funding streams so they can continue uninhibited if they decide that they want to do this. But we thought it was important to move now on this, but there wasn't, I don't mean to suggest there was a holdup on the vote on any particular commissioner side at all. It's just we decided that now was the right time to bring it forward for a vote.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks all. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Will Wyquist, for the Bureau press conference, where we'll cover questions on today's items. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon. So as Katie said, we're going to take questions on the items themselves that were voted today. I'm going to group them by the bureaus so that the teams don't have to come up multiple times. So first up, the Wireline Bureau. That would cover the infrastructure build item, the delete, delete, delete item, and the 2 E-rate items. Do we have any questions on any of those? Yep, okay.
Hi, how can I help?
Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. The usual question. On the E-rate and delete, delete, delete items, were there any substantive changes made from the drafts to the final items, anything that affects policy?
Certainly not on the delete, delete, delete. I think the only edits were clerical, fixing a footnote here and there, period, comma, sort of stuff. Commissioner Trustee had some edits to the E-rate items. I can leave that to her to discuss. They were her substantive edits, but mostly around closing the gap between the 2023 DR and 2024 rules and the statutory language. That's it.
Any other questions on these?
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Great, thanks. So next up would be the Wireless Bureau, also an infrastructure item, and the contraband cell phone item. Any questions on those items? Matt? Yep. Thank you.
Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. On the contraband phone item, same question. Were there any substantive policy changes made between the draft and the final order? Not footnote stuff, but actual.
Yeah, I think you heard Commissioner Gomez refer to some changes that she requested with respect to the pilot program, and also seeking comment on gathering how to best gather complaints from consumers and figure out whether there's interference to existing systems and devices. And I think we may have also made some changes in response to stakeholder comments. I think they were mostly just sort of updating, reflecting ex partes that were filed, not necessarily substantive changes, sorry.
Any other questions on these items?
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, the Media Bureau on the quadrennial review, right? Media Bureau. Thanks for giving us purpose. I appreciate it.
I know nobody wants to go to lunch, so. Specifically on the quadrennial review, can you give a little insight into the edit? Commissioner Gomez had indicated that there had been some edits that had made to it. Can you give a little more color as to that, a little more depth as to what we're talking about in terms of her edits?
Yeah, she just had a number of questions here and there that we accommodated. No specific themes to them. It was just kind of sprinkled throughout the item.
Oh, but like what sort of questions are we talking about?
Yeah, so questions about specific DMAs and effects on, particular markets, just sort of clarifying, I think, around the edges of those types of things. It will be, I think that you can probably see the changes that are in there when we release the item.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I just don't have them in here right now. It's been a long 4 hours.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions on this item? Great, thank you. Well, appropriate to that question, let me hand it off to Commissioner Gomez, if she's ready. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. It's a long day. Sorry. So, as you may know, earlier this year I launched the First Amendment tour to fight back against this administration's campaign of censorship and control. I did that after my own agency launched a series of retaliatory investigations targeted at newsrooms' editorial decisions. We've also seen this FCC use frivolous news distortion complaints and the power to derail corporate mergers to pressure news entities and to abandon their editorial independence and silence government critics. Let me say that again. To pressure news entities to abandon their editorial independence and silence government critics. Just recently, we saw one of the most alarming attacks on the First Amendment in recent memory. As I mentioned earlier, first, an ABC reporter was told his coverage amounted to hate speech and that he should be prosecuted just for doing his job. Then the FCC threatened to go after the same network, seizing on the comments of a late-night comedian as a pretext to punish speech it disliked. That led to a show of cowardly corporate capitulation by Disney that put the foundation of the First Amendment at risk. This was no simple business decision. It was a clear act of government intimidation. The FCC does not have the authority, the ability, or the constitutional right to police lawful content or to punish broadcasters for speech government dislikes. And if it were to take the unprecedented step of trying to revoke broadcast licenses, which are held by local stations rather than national networks, it would run headlong into the First Amendment. But the threats are the point. Even the threat of revoking a license is no small matter. It poses an existential risk to a broadcaster. Ultimately, after days of bipartisan pushback against this weaponization of government power, Disney backed off. However, for several days, the corporate behemoths who own large swaths of local stations across the country did not. That's because the billion-dollar media companies have business before the FCC. They are pushing the FCC to reduce regulatory guardrails so they can grow even bigger. That has left local stations trapped in the middle as these massive companies impose their will and their values upon local communities. This encapsulates the danger of allowing vast and unfettered media consolidation. With a vote today, the FCC is gearing up to make major changes that will drastically alter the media ecosystem and the number of voices that are a part of it. That will do nothing to help the small, independent, and local broadcast stations that are at risk of closing shop. The FCC has a duty to ensure our media system serves the public, not billion-dollar corporations. Not to mention, this form of media consolidation will further push independent local newsrooms to answer to corporate masters who are already under political pressure from this administration. The FCC won't need to threaten to investigate individual stations. Journalists and comedians won't need to be censored directly. They'll censor themselves to avoid conflict with regulators or risk losing government favor. The result will be a chilling effect on coverage, fewer jobs, and less diversity of viewpoints. In the end, this administration's effort has never been about preserving diversity of voices. It's about narrowing them. Take, for example, the successful effort to defund public media. After months of baseless attacks, public media is facing an existential threat of its own. So while one set of outlets is defunded, potentially stripped of their licenses, or publicly admonished, others are quietly promoted and cleared of regulatory obstacles. Let me be clear. The government does not have a role in reducing bias or ensuring a balance of opinions. But to this administration, that has never been the goal. Instead, they seek to engineer a media environment that echoes the government's worldview. This is not viewpoint diversity. It is viewpoint control. And if we allow the government to decide which voices survive and which ones are silenced, we lose the very foundation of a free press, and with it, the democratic principles it seeks to protect. Thank you. I'll take your questions.
Hi, Commissioner. Chris Cole with Law 360. I just wanted to ask, so it definitely is your position that the statute bars the FCC from lifting the 39% cap, and if that were to occur, there would be a legal basis for challenging that action?
Yes.
Unmistakably. So it's not an open legal question?
No, the statute set the 39% precedent, cap. Sorry, it's been a long day. Speaking hard. The statute sets the 39% cap. In fact, the FCC 20 years ago tried to impose a higher cap, and Congress disagreed with the FCC, passed the law, and set the cap by statute. So I don't think we have discretion to just decide to ignore that statutory limitation.
Hi, Commissioner. Jim Rutenberg from the New York Times. Thanks for your time today. I'm just curious if you agree with the chairman's interpretation and use of the public interest standard, or when he talks about the kind of a show-by-show FCC analysis. And while I'm at it, I'm also curious if you're seeing any indication that there will be more moves out of this agency regarding specific national shows on local stations.
This administration seems to use the public interest standard to mean anything, targeting anything this administration doesn't like from a content perspective. I have called for this FCC to do a rulemaking to define what it means by the public interest standard, because we can't just use it as a weapon to go after content we don't like. For starters, the First Amendment bars us from doing so, as does the Communications Act, which prohibits us from censoring broadcasters. But that is how it's being used right now. It's being used as a threat. It's an undefined standard. Our traditional pillars of media regulation have been ensuring competition, a diversity of viewpoints, and localism, serving your local communities. That is how we look at the public interest. If we're going to use that phrase for something beyond that, particularly when it comes to targeting specific speech by broadcasters, then it's incumbent on us to define what we mean by that.
Hi, Jeremy Barr from The Guardian. So the idea about news distortion complaints, Chairman Carr talked about them and how they can be used. Sometimes he seems like he might be encouraging them to be filed. I mean, do you sense that he is, obviously there's an organization, Center for American Rights, that has filed a lot of these complaints against ABC, you know, all the big networks. Is he supposed to be playing more of an independent role, or is it sort of permissible in your eyes to be kind of casting about and saying that perhaps there could be a news distortion complaint if The View, if Whoopi Goldberg says something particular on The View? Like, how do you see that news distortion complaint and the role that the FCC commissioners are supposed to play there?
So the news distortion policy is a very strict standard for what the commission looks at when it looks at specific complaints about news distortion. That was a lot of words, sorry. It's very difficult to meet our standard for the news distortion policy. And importantly, our enforcement authority only applies to the local broadcasters. But in order for there to be news distortion, it has to be a significant event with intention to distort. So it's by the management of that local broadcaster. It is very difficult to meet that standard. We are getting numerous news distortion complaints filed, particularly by one partisan organization that is being used as a way to threaten broadcasters not to criticize and to report and to have content, comedic content, entertainment content that this administration likes, and to bar anything that it does not like. So we should not be threatening broadcasters for their content. We are prohibited from doing so by the First Amendment and by the specific provisions of the Communications Act that prohibits us from censoring broadcasters.
Hi, Commissioner. Diego Munoz from Punchbowl News. So it sounds like you think it's a good idea to engage in rulemaking regarding the public interest standard. Is that right?
Yes, I think if we are going to continue to threaten broadcasters for failing to serve their communities in the public interest, then it is incumbent on us to do a rulemaking asking what that specifically means.
What's your view of what it should mean?
I think that the public interest requires us to continue to ensure localism, competition, and viewpoint diversity, not to censor specific content just because we don't like it.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner. Ted Johnson from Deadline. And forgive me, I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. My first question is, what is your response to Chairman Carr when he said that he wasn't threatening ABC and Kimmel when he gave those comments to Benny Johnson in his podcast? And the other question is, a lot of legal experts believe that some of these FCC moves, or if they were to act on one of these complaints, are outside of their authority. The only problem is that companies aren't challenging them. They aren't taking them to court. What can you do, I guess, to encourage some of these companies perhaps to challenge the FCC on these issues?
Yes, the threats are the point, right? This administration wants capitulation before it gets to the courts because they want the companies to alter their behavior now, and they don't want to risk having it go to court. So initiating complaints, putting a complaint out on public notice, as the FCC did when it sought comment on the video of the Kamala Harris interview in the 60 Minutes segment, to ask the public whether it violates the FCC's rules. I don't think we do enforcement by mob, but never reaching a conclusion. We haven't dismissed that complaint, even though it does not meet the standard for news distortion. We still have an open complaint against NBC and ABC, supposedly for news distortion and a violation of our equal time rules. Why do we still have that? Because it's a pressure mechanism. And it's to pressure these companies, particularly CBS. We still have our eye on you, and you'd better comply with your voluntary commitment to have a truth arbiter that's going to complaints about our content, CBS content. We need corporations to stop capitulating. They are fraying our First Amendment and our democracy every time they capitulate. But I understand they're businesses. They have obligations to their shareholders. So it's also our obligation not to threaten and not to have these complaints hanging over people's heads, and not to continue to threaten people with news distortion findings because we don't like whatever the content of their news reporting or their comedic episodes or entertainment.
Thank you. Commissioner Gomez, Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. I just have one question because I'm not an anarchist. Can you respond to the chairman's repeated comments that he's not doing anything different than the previous administration had done vis-a-vis how it's handling broadcasters? Thank you.
I didn't see the previous administration threaten to revoke licenses. So it's what we are seeing today is unprecedented. This administration is utilizing the FCC's regulatory authority over licensees in order to censor content.
Commissioner Dave Shepardson from Reuters. I think I'm the last person between lunch and all of us, so I'll be quick.
I'm hungry.
One of the things that's Chairman Carr referenced the conduct of the prior administration. Right now the FCC has lots of authority in order to approve mergers, and as a result, and it certainly in the past has, under Democrats, required conditions as part of those mergers too. How do you ensure that the FCC can properly, advance the public interest standard and other of its goals while not using that authority to, improperly press broadcasters or others to engage in other administration priorities that go beyond the FCC's authority?
That's a really good question. I would point out that when the FCC has previously conditioned, and it has done so expressly, transfers of control, mergers, it has done so under its normal public interest analysis, which looks at whether the benefits of a particular transaction outweigh any, what's the opposite of benefit? Harms, thank you. Words just hard today. Any specific harms that arise out of that specific transaction. And also, does the FCC have any authority under the statute to impose those conditions directly on those particular license holders? I'm really having trouble with words today, I'm sorry. So my point is, not only is this administration pressuring the licensees to adopt practices that are outside of the FCC's authority, but it is doing so with harms that have nothing to do with the specific transaction. So if you look at Paramount and Skydance, the two commitments that were made by Paramount, note they were not conditions of the actual order of the FCC. The FCC approved the transaction after Paramount came in with these concessions, were about eliminating all their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which there was no finding of a harm related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in that particular transaction or in all the other transactions where it has had the same requirement of the parties. So you're not addressing a specific harm raised by that specific transaction. Same thing with the commitment to appoint the truth arbiter, which is the ombudsperson reporting directly to Paramount to field complaints about content. It has nothing to do with a transaction between Paramount and Skydance. There is no specific harm raised by that. So I think the FCC needs to go back to its traditional merger analysis and to making sure that if it's going to make requirements of parties as a condition of approving a particular transaction, it is effectively regulating. It better be within its remit under the Communications Act.
Sorry, super briefly, on the news distortion standard, I'm sorry. The last time the commission, acted on news distortion was in, the early 90s involving, Dateline and basically planting explosives on a truck that turned to make it blow up on camera. But even in that case, the FCC only admonished the station didn't withdraw the license. Do you have a clear sense of what the current FCC thinking is on the news distortion standard and what might merit some more severe action by the commission?
I don't know what's coming, but I can tell you it's entirely inappropriate for this FCC to censor content based on some vague standard. Thank you. Go eat.